Commissioner Parrish,
Here.
Commissioner Stoker,
Here.
Commissioner Lemke,
Here.
Commissioner Schaefer,
Here.
Commissioner Chorin,
Here.
Commissioner Hawley,
Here.
Commissioner Bach, Commissioner, did I call him Commissioner Bach? Commissioner Gentes,
Here.
Alderman Strelchek,
Here.
Mayor Worth.
Here. I first would like to thank this many commissioners for showing up on an odd evening. It's impressive, your dedication. I'd also like to welcome Dan Genchis and our two newest members. Is it Bach, huh? I thought it was Bach. Oh, okay. I knew you were Bach. I thought you called Greg.
They shouldn't sit next to each other.
And they're the two guys without name tags. Let me just give a little rundown about how we're going to structure the meeting so that we kind of keep on track and try to move this along. First, there are a couple of people who registered to speak, and I assume they're registering to speak in general terms and not about specific issues on the agenda. So we'll go to that first. If anybody has comments about specific issues on the agenda, we'll take them up then. And we're going to divide this into 7 different questions, kind of along the outline. So there's the wellness building awnings, the public market window coverings, mechanical screening for the public market, mechanical screening for St. Paul's Fish Market, the master sign plan amendment, the lighting plan amendment, and the landscaping plan, including plantings, bike racks, benches, and trash receptacles. So we're going to take each one of those. Staff will give a short report. The applicant will be able to state their position. We'll then have questions, hopefully a motion, discussion among commissioners, vote, and then move on to the next item, as opposed to taking this all up as one package. I think it'll move things along a little bit better and have a more coherent discussion. So, not to belabor the preliminary start, first, Polly Kaplan has registered to speak. Polly's with Beans and Barley, and she said she'd like to speak. If you'd come up to the microphone, please.
Hi, thank you. I just wanted to come here today and tell you how excited Beans and Barley is to be part of the Spur 16 development. We really thought we would wind up in Bayview when we were looking for a second location. We never ever would have considered Mequon as a good fit. Our friends from Anodyne told us they were going to be in the building, and so we're like, on a lark, we'll go check it out. And we were just so excited to be a part of something that really had a great community feel, a special walkability. We just think Jenny and Cindy have been really great to work with. I joined Club Pilates because I wanted to spy on the development, and I think it looks beautiful, and it's so beautiful to see all of the trees going in, and we're just really excited, and we hope that whatever issues can be resolved so we can all get to work and be a part of the community that we're eager to join. So
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next registered to speak is Meg Hopkins. She's a representative of Latora. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
Laterre. Hi, how are you? How is
Laterra.
everybody?
There's an E. I thought it was an O.
Hi.
Sorry.
And I'm the one who wrote you a letter over the weekend,
Yes.
so thank you for your quick response. I'm a small business owner on a store in the 3rd Ward called Elements East, and Vicki Coons, who is in the yellow sweater, is joining forces with me to do Laterre. We'll be the only non-restaurant in the market. It'll be a European floral and gift shop, which we're super excited about. And not unlike Polly, we're palpably excited to be in the market. I'm also a Mequon resident, so I hear every day what the need is for what the market represents. I read over the weekend the agenda for today and was frankly alarmed at all the seemingly fairly sizable issues that are yet to be addressed. So I'm really here as a nonpartisan to say, I don't know how we all got here, except to say that I really, really want to be in the market. And because we're not a restaurant that's already open, we've had to hire people already that can't go somewhere else. I can't float them to another restaurant. They've quit their jobs to come work, and a lot of them happen to be Mequon high school and college students. So I can't ethically string them along for weeks if we don't know when we're gonna open, or if we're gonna open this summer. It just isn't the right thing to do. I have a manager that is on my payroll or on our payroll with no income. So whatever you can do to help small business owners get some revenue in the spirit of a market that we really believe in, we would truly appreciate. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both. Before we go to Jack for the first item, I just want to say we thank you both for deciding to locate here. We're all excited about it opening also. And that's why we're having this meeting, to try to cut through what appears to have been somewhat of a stalemate for a while. Jack, if you want to take the first issue, the wellness building awnings.
Sure. Just a side note before that, I understand you all received your packet. I just wanted to make sure, Director Tolleson couldn't be here this evening. She did provide some commentary at the beginning of the packet. I won't go through the entire commentary. I just want to make sure that you guys all have seen it and realize that she has obviously a vested interest in making sure this is a successful development and in keeping with the town center design guidelines. So going on to the first item, the wellness building, and how I'll try to handle this. There's a lot of exhibits, so what I'll try to do is put the exhibits up on the screen and kind of go through the report as we.
If I could just quickly, since there was some context provided for the staff report, I wonder if we could just provide a little introductory comment as well, since you don't have anything from us.
I said you would after staff does.
And I know you want to do
when you go staff, then you can have your.
But we'd also like to do something a little bit more comprehensive.
Okay, brief comments would be fine.
Is this an appropriate time, or?
Sure.
So just because I know you have the written staff comments in your packet, and those were posted online, we were provided those at the end of Friday. So first of all, again, echoing the mayor's comments, thank you all for the public service of being here tonight. We greatly appreciate it, and we know this is not a small service to be taking time out of your busy schedules to be here tonight. We were also troubled by a number of the comments that we saw. First of all, I think it's important, though, that we put this in the context of where we've been and where we are today. Starting in 2016, we weren't sure we'd be at this point. There are a lot of requirements in our development agreement that we've exceeded with your help, with the help of the city, with the help of city staff, and we are super excited to be able to move forward with that overperformance. I mean, for instance, there's a requirement in our development agreement that we achieve $26.1 million worth of accessible value. We're exceeding that. There's a requirement in our development agreement that we have commercial components open by December of 2020. We're ready to open the commercial components now. I think there were some alders that were skeptical that we'd be able to achieve that commercial component immediately. We've been able to do that in conjunction with the apartments, and we're very excited about that and excited about what the market's been able to bring. When Cindy first visioned this public market, we weren't sure what this would look like. Didn't have any tenants, didn't have anybody ready to go. We've got the cream of the crop ready to come and open in Mequon in what's, other than the downtown public market, a one-of-a-kind proposal that's before you tonight. So we're very excited of where we've been able to achieve something extremely unique and successful. We hope very successful, but we need that partnership to continue. In the staff report, Director Tolleson comments about the fact that this is a partnership with the city. We certainly view it that way and want it to continue to be that way. But then words like default and penalty that are in the staff report also really aren't what we're expecting from a partner. Default is a really scary word, and it's not something that we can take lightly. I know there are some attorneys on the board here tonight as well, and that can't be a word that's just floated around. We don't think there's any grounds for that. We think we are in compliance with the development agreement, and hopefully with your help tonight, we can be able to move forward and make sure that we are fully in compliance and able to service our contractual obligations to our tenants and to our employees and to our lenders and our private investors. So this is really, really an important thing for us to be able to come to some resolution tonight that allows all of us to move forward and lets our tenants to be able to open their doors in a timely fashion. So we appreciate that. I wanted to provide those contexts and comments just because the context of default and penalty are not things that we can just ignore. So appreciate that and appreciate the opportunity just to provide a little context, and I know that we will be talking about the items specifically.
So the first request is for the wellness building, on which I'll get to the pictures in a little bit. This is a request not to install the metal or fabric awnings on the building as required by the approved plan. With regard to the steel awnings, the applicant states that it was a design of a sign feature that's no longer being considered as an option, and does not feel that the awning is applicable. And there's also a request not to have the fabric awnings on the building at the desire of the tenants, not to block sunlight into the building area. So in the terms of the report, I'll start with Exhibit A, which is in your packet. This is our PUD. This is the ordinance that created the PUD for the site. As you can see on the screen, the section right here where it says the two existing city facility buildings shall incorporate awnings as part of the renovated building design. So this was part of the PUD. This was something that we wanted from the beginning. This was known throughout the process, and staff doesn't feel that we can modify that requirement without amending the PUD. So I think from a plan commission standpoint, I don't think we can just negate the entire awning selection that's being shown without going through that PUD process. Exhibit B shows the staff report, which I kind of highlighted the area. This is their staff report from August 7th of 2017, when the applicant received initial approval. Again, this referred to the PUD requirements with regard to including the awnings. And then in the June 11, 2018 meeting, there was a discussion about the building shown at this point as multi-tenant for both yoga and Pilates, with a shared space showing the awnings in accordance with the PUD. So this has been kind of an ongoing known quantity for this building. In terms of the state approved plan I have in front of you, this is, now this shows the change of the signage. The signage is no longer on the awning, it's shown above here. Now ultimately they put the two signs in the middle, but in terms of the location and the context with the awning, I'm not sure what the sign has to do with the actual awning being there or not being there. So this is the state approved plan that city approved. This is the side elevation showing the awning as well. And then I also included, this is kind of a rendering of the awnings over the two garage doors that are on the side of the building. Now, the awnings themselves were required to come back to staff review for the final design, which we obviously haven't done. When the staff did the final inspection on this building, we issued an occupancy permit that the awnings be installed by May 1st. When we met with them in April, that was the first time we heard that they were not willing to put the awnings up, which again, we put the condition on with the option of going back to planning commission, which is why we're here today. So in terms of staff's recommendation, we recommend that the applicant follow either the approved plan that includes the steel awnings as well as the fabric awnings, or we also gave them an option at one point if the sunlight was an issue for these two tenants. We talked about extending a steel awning over these two as well. But in either case, we feel that the awnings are a vital piece to this design and recommend that they're installed in according to the plan. So.
Spur 16, please.
Yes, I'd like our architects to speak to this. I'd just like to clarify and say that we did know this was something we had been talking about, and that we never said we were not willing to do that. We were in discussions with staff on this topic going back and forth, and then coming back tonight, it was the suggestion I think you made, Mayor, to bring it up so we could resolve this situation. I'd also like to say, if I may, that we have been working with staff really well over the last 3 years. This is my book, my binder of meeting notes. We've been meeting on a regular basis on many different issues. So up until just this last month, things have been going really well. So I sincerely thank you for coming, and I apologize that we have to be here tonight. I'd also like to briefly introduce my team. Mark Taylor from Engberg Anderson. He's been the lead architect, and he's been at many of the meetings with us. Mark Ernst is a principal and partner in Engberg Anderson. He was in many of the meetings with city staff, council members. You've met Deb Tomchek, my representative. She is the head of partner and the head of legal for Reinhardt Borner Van Duren. She's one of the best real estate attorneys in the state. Jenny Vetter is my COO. She's responsible for putting together all these great market tenants and going out and meeting with them. and David Kwiatkowski, who is from C.D. Smith Construction. Dave's last project was the 777 building, the Northwestern Mutual Tower downtown. So I have a great team here to help us. And I guess I'd like Mark to address the awnings.
Well, I think, in terms of the awnings and et cetera, we have those, they were shown on elevations, but that was before everything was finalized with the clients. And as Cindy had pointed out, the metal was initially part of a sign package when the building was going to be a single tenant. It had later changed to 2 tenants. And then the fabric awnings were something that was going back and forth on whether those would go to be installed. So I think the question on that is whether they need to still be installed. They're not really serving any functional purpose on it. And I guess we'll just make ourselves available to answer any questions that you guys have regarding this.
And we're willing to make, if you feel strongly about this and the city wants this, we're willing to do what's wanted, but again, it's not something the architect or the tenants wanted, but we're willing to concede to make the city happy.
Sure, okay. Commissioner Chorn.
Now, the awning quote on the southeast corner, it's a horizontal element, isn't it? Is it an awning, or was it really intention was to mount the signage on it?
Well, I think it was really to animate the exterior thing.
Originally, the sign was gonna be
Original
top
sign
sign.
was gonna be part of it, so
Yeah.
as the signage changed, it would no longer really serve the purpose.
Right. But it's a horizontal
It was
member.
just a horizontal.
Right.
I would describe the ones on the east face as awnings over the large garage doors.
Now, the ones on the east, if you think about daylight, I mean, it would, presumably you'd need something on the south, perhaps on the east and the west, but, is the concern daylight into some of those spaces?
Yeah, if you can see, I don't think we can go back and forth between our presentation, but that's why I did the printout. If you look at the interiors, you can see the interior space and how important the light is.
See, I guess the point I'm trying to make is that the horizontal element that wrapped the corner seemed to be more of an architectural item rather than control of any daylight. But the awnings above the garage doors, I think, did serve that purpose. So, if the concern is daylighting, the ones above the garage door make some sense.
And just for context, it's actually our tenants who said they preferred not to have those awnings because they want additional sunlight inside the space. So we were trying to respond to their request.
From the view there, given the size of those window openings, my guess that the size of those awnings aren't going to block a whole lot of light into that space. So again, it comes back to an architectural, view and what was presented and what leniency we have with that.
Other questions?
Yes. So,
Mr. Baca.
picking up on what you just said, why is staff so, I use the word adamant, that awnings, as originally a plan, should continue to be part of the overall plan?
Well, first of all, it was required. It's required by the PUD. It was also required by the Planning Commission. So we're basically making sure that they comply with the plan that was submitted in front of you. That steel feature was also included on the similar feature on the public market as well as the St. Paul. Originally, when this went through the PUD process, we were concerned about the lack of articulation in these buildings, and that's why there was a request to have some sort of feature on that building to give it a little bit of dimension to it. And we were happy with the result that was presented to Planning Commission, and we supported the look of the awnings, and we just don't feel that there's a need or a reason why to backtrack from that approval.
Are awnings a feature required under the town center guidelines?
There are guidelines that talk about adding awnings. I don't know if it's an exact you shall have them, but they are incorporated as a feature of the buildings to invoke that pedestrian-friendly kind of design.
I think it's section City Code 50-301 states the awnings and canopies are encouraged, is the verbiage of the code.
Other questions?
respectfully, I would like to comment a little bit. I'm a home builder in Mequon. We have to go through a planning, an architectural control meeting for our homes, which is very unique. There's only one other municipality in southeastern Wisconsin that we have to do that. And when we're done submitting those plans and we get approved, and we do not build the home according to those plans, we have an issue. And I understand that we could go through changing the PUD to eliminate this. I can't imagine this is a huge cost. And frankly, I think it will give a horizontal look to this building that I think we should keep them required. I'm the strongest supporter of this development. I think it's fantastic. It's beautiful. I just have a bigger issue with suddenly having things not show up. We went through something like this very similar with Capco Field years ago. And I was a very adamant commissioner saying that we can't just let them not provide what they told us they were going to provide. So from my context, I think they need to stay on. If we decide as a group tonight that we want to go through the process of changing the PUD to eliminate them, I would listen to it, but I haven't heard of a compelling reason why they shouldn't be there.
I totally agree with you, John. I mean, we're not trying to not do something we said we would do. I can't answer.
Discussion. Jim?
I would concur with Commissioner Stoker. I think that it was agreed to and they should be on the building. I also think it is an interesting architectural element, which kind of takes away from that industrial look of the building, and I think they should remain.
Any questions? Mr. Parrish?
Just adding, I'm in favor of an awning. I guess I'm not married to any specific design or concept, so if they were to come forward or work with staff on an alternative awning or decorative feature that satisfied the tenants and the staff, I'd be happy with it. I just think nothing is probably what no one's looking for.
Yes, Mr. Alderman Strelchak.
As you guys all know, I've been in support of this project since day one. I'm really excited to see everything that's going in. Kind of where I'm at on this issue is if this came forward, and I understand the projects progress and tenants make requests, I don't feel you're out of line for coming to this meeting and asking to remove awnings that you originally approved for. I think it's a reasonable request. And I think as a commission, we really just have to sit forward and say, okay, would we have approved this in the beginning? You know, as this came forward as a concept plan, you know, does it fit with the entire look and the feel of the entire development? In this case, I would prefer to see some horizontal element on the building, whether we remain with the metal structural on the corner. My only concern when I voted in favor of this project versus the other one was that these buildings were going to look old and out of place compared to the new things that were going in. And the appeal for me as you guys kept coming forward with your plans is that more industrial feel like the old Spur 16, but you still kept it real high-end and rich looking for the city of Mequon. And I think the exterior of the building is just, it's kind of flat, it's just kind of brick, and it really doesn't have as much character as I want. That metal awning on the corner that does really nothing to screen, but it's just an architectural element. If we're talking about the two, you know, the metal versus the fabric, I definitely am supportive of remaining and requiring you to put in the metal awning. I just think it's an architectural element that ties in with the building. And I think with your design capability, you can continue to use that effectively and enhance the building to tie in with the neighboring buildings. I'm on the fence on whether or not the other awnings on the buildings, like the fabric ones, would add anything to it. I'm open to listen to what my fellow commissioners have to say. I can take those or leave those, so I'm not going to make a motion in favor of those, but you know, when it comes time to a motion, I would make a motion for the metal one to remain.
By the way, it's always time for a motion, but Mr. Chorin, did you have a comment?
Well, kind of to follow up, I really like the horizontal that wrap the corner, and the fabric ones that go over the garage seem to be a little bit out of place. And personally, I'd rather see the horizontal over the garage. Now I realize that they cost more.
It's about $20,000.
Yeah, so I don't want to, you know, burden you with something that would cost you more and deviates from what was originally approved.
have a motion?
So I'll make a motion.
Make a motion.
I'd like to make a motion that the metal awning on the corner is, would remain, but the fabric awnings over the other openings would be allowed to be removed.
Well, technically, you're, here, just to be clear, both Dan and Greg, you guys are alternates, and we have you're more than welcome to participate in the discussion, but you can't make motions or vote unless somebody disappears. For tonight, we're overstaffed, so that probably will change in the future when we have people missing meetings. So, there was a motion, is there a second?
Second.
Question about the motion, and just 1 second. Would that require going back, in staff's opinion, to amend the PUD?
No, I think as long as we're incorporating some type of awning on the structure, I think we're in compliance.
I apologize.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just clarification, because we'd like to know that we can move forward with something definitive tonight. It's the per the approved plan, correct? The steel awning per the approved plan.
Yes, so that, I'm also flexible if you and staff work something out that's similar, but again, I really want this to move forward without a lot of discussion after the fact. If you
That's
got
our
a
goal.
great idea that works with what they want and you both say yes right away, and it looks very similar to what's on there,
Well,
Thank you.
that would be my opinion.
Do you have an objection to what's on the approved plan for that awning? I guess I'm surprised about the question, so I want to make sure we're clear what we're talking about.
Well, I guess we should be clear on, I don't recall what the differences are between the state approved plan and the planning commission approved plan, but I would say that what's shown up on the screen is the plan that was approved by the state. That's acceptable in terms of the location and type of awning.
And is that what you're?
Yes, thank you.
I don't want to walk away with a disagreement or a ambiguity.
I have one question.
Yes.
On my motion. If the tenant comes forward and say that they'd want the fabric awnings in the future, after we told them they're not required to have them, would they need to come back forward to this body for approval on those?
Well, part of that may stem on what we decide on the next item in terms of what we're gonna require in that building. I mean, the biggest issue when we had the discussion about the fabric awnings, we agreed with the development team that there's no really other fabric awnings in the development. And we felt they were not really, in keeping with the industrial feel of the building, and that's why we recommended, as what Marty said, an additional steel awning over that area. We would have to evaluate what the proposal looks like, and then we would work with the chair and determine whether that's a staff-approved issue or that would come back to planning commission, depending on what it looks like.
I'm just trying to leave
So
it.
we have a motion and a second. Any other discussion on the motion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? We have an agreement on one of our 7 issues, or a decision. The next item is the public market window coverings, Jack.
Right, this one's gonna be a little bit more detailed and probably a lot more lengthy in terms of the report. So basically, the request is a waiver to 58-301, which this relates to the obstruction of windows. The request is to install spandrel glass over 6 of the windows that are obstructed by kitchen vent hoods. And the applicant is also requesting to cover up 2 windows that are obstructed by a walk-in cooler and a partial window due to a half wall with a sink. The applicant has provided 4 different alternatives that include logos and spandrel glass. I'll leave their options and presentation up to them, and they can discuss that, and I'll just go over the background and what we're recommending for different options. So in terms of the approval process, again, back in August of 2017, this was in front of the Planning Commission. This was basically for an initial building and site plan approval. At the time, the applicant was requesting basically a blanket waiver to cover the windows because of the issues with kitchens and potential hood obstructions. At the time, there was not a signed lease for the tenants, so they were not sure what windows were going to need to be covered and what the extent was. So at the time, Planning Commission said, well, you need to come back once you have your tenants figured out. We're not going to issue any blanket approval to cover the windows, and we'll deal with that once you get your tenants secured. June 11, 2018, they came in for final building approval. It was submitted showing 3 obstructions on the east side, which I do have on the screen. Let me just rotate this. So this was in front of at the June meeting. This shows, at the time, basically, they were asking for obstructions over 3 of the windows. It's probably kind of hard to see on there, but there's one here, one in this location, one in this location. These were the areas where the hoods were gonna go based on the tenants that they knew at the time in the floor plan. And so there was a discussion at Planning Commission, and we were open to working with them on trying to figure out the best aesthetic for that process. No other requests for window obstructions were asked for at the time of that meeting. So as the applicant went forward with the process, they submitted a site plan or a floor plan that was pretty similar to what has been the floor plan throughout the process. There's been some minor tweaks to it, but for the most part, the floor plan was consistent. I did put in there the staff approval conditions from that meeting, which says all windows shall be designed with clear glass and comply with the obstruction requirements of the town center code. So this was at that June meeting, this was a condition of approval. Basically and I have again, there's a lot of details in the report. This is basically the June 11th floor plan that was submitted as part of that approval process. And then I have a bunch of other floor plans, which I'll skim over. We won't go through those, but from June 11th till February 26th, we really didn't have any discussions with the applicant regarding the market and the obstructions of windows. We issued a permit on February 26th for the second floor mezzanine. This is basically the mezzanine floor plan, which is pretty similar to what you saw on that June 11th plan. At the beginning of March, we started getting the individual tenant applications in for the build-outs, which again started showing some of the hoods. That prompted a meeting with staff from Spur 16 as well as Kim and I to discuss, obstructions. And at that time, we were told, there may be issues with additional windows that need to be covered, and they'd like to have a discussion with that. But they were insistent on making sure that the permits get issued and we continue the process. So we agreed that we would issue the permits in the event of going forward and working out some of these details with regards to obstruction of additional windows. We had a meeting in April on site. At that point, we did notice the windows, a lot of the installation was already complete, and there was a lot more windows covered than what was approved or what was shown to Planning Commission back in June. So there was a lot of discussion about that. We asked for an action plan, how they were gonna comply. We did not really receive anything in detail, so we had a staff meeting May 7th to discuss this amongst other issues that we were going through that were not compliant with the plan. At that point, we advised them that they could continue at their own risk, but there may be options that would present in front of the commission that may require them to remove certain structural materials on the building if the commission felt that was the most appropriate methodology. I also have some language in there from our building inspector. There was a note in the applicant's report that says the building inspector was one that required the windows to be fully enclosed. That was not the case. There's a letter from the building inspector, fire inspector, and health inspector that was signed saying that was one of the options that we discussed, but it was not a requirement that those had to be closed off. So I just wanted to kind of go through that. In general, again, if there's any questions about these specific floor plans, there's also, and I have pictures in there, I put a key in there with all the pictures of the building. There's also a mezzanine that intersects the windows. There was no detail at the time of the June 11 with that plan, what that was gonna look like. The pictures kind of show one that's finished with the bronze material and then one that shows it's steel. You can kind of get an idea what that looks like. And there's also a couple windows on the plan that are covered by a drop ceiling. And I can go through some of those pictures, but there's a lot of detail in here. I don't want to go through every single one of these, so let me just skip past. So here's the letter from our inspector, who's here tonight too, if you have any questions. This is the window key that shows the pictures of all the different windows. And then I'll just kind of run through some of the issues. So this is basically one of the windows that shows, as you can see here, this is basically a drop ceiling that 45s back up. And then above here, this is the mezzanine. This one is actually coated with the bronze material. And as you go through them, this is another drop ceiling. This is also an Ansel system that's sticking out past the window. And then this is a detail. This kind of shows, this is the mezzanine before the finished treatment is put on it. And then this shows basically the option of closing off those windows. This is basically steel stud enclosure with drywall. This is their request to move forward so that they did not hold the tenants up to close off basically those entire windows. So that basically, I don't need to go through all the different windows, but I just wanted to give you some context because the drawings did not really show exactly the level of how those windows kind of currently look. So, so in terms of staff's recommendation, I just want to rotate this a bit. So we provided several different options. This is design option 1. This is basically wood paneling with a steel awning. This option shows this back. This is the north elevation. This shows a wood panel similar to what you see on the front of the building. And it also shows a wood panel basically covering these 4 windows in a row, which are all obstructed by hoods, as well as this individual window here. And then the other markings are for a tinted glass design. In this option, basically, I just want to make sure I get my options right. This option also has a steel awning to the north facade and basically recommends the removal of the interior knee wall, which is shown on the north elevation. Right here, you can see a picture. This is basically a knee wall with a sink that they show a sign, and this option shows that sink being relocated or moved so that that glass is clear and unobstructed. There's the second option, option 2. I just want to get to the right exhibit. This is M. This again does a similar treatment, but then this adds a fabric awning over those 4 windows. This would have been somewhat in conjunction if we kept the fabric awnings on the last, on the Weldis building. So I'm not sure if this would be totally appropriate at this time. Again, this talks about bronze tinting over the entire glass. The kitchen hood on the standalone window is basically blocked on the east facade would be removed and relocated to the interior. So this one here would just be basically removed. So this would be unobstructed to match the ones on both sides. Again, on the north side, the awning is added over 2 windows that are completely blocked, and a steel awning is added over the smaller garage door. I'm just gonna try to shrink this down a little bit for you guys. So again, this is the same option showing the awning off the back side. And then this is the third awning. This is, or the third option. This shows the actual bricking in of these windows, as well as, I believe, bricking in on the back side of these windows, this knee wall, keeping the knee wall in place, but bricking that portion in of the glass. And it shows the bronzing of the areas where there's the walk-in cooler. There's also some imagery that was put in your packet regarding how some of that area could be treated with some sort of painting or design where those windows would be bricked in. You don't go through all these, but obviously the most famous one is the one in Nashville with the wings that have basically a 2-hour line to stand in front of to take a picture of. So these are just different options that we put in there that would take the place of that area where the windows would be bricked in. So, and then a final condition of all the other windows that we're not specifically detailing would all be clear and free of any obstructions. So those are basically our 3 different options. I can turn it over to them to talk about the 4 options that they presented and pull up their presentation.
Our turn.
Yes, please.
So of the 3 options you just heard, we're not supportive of any of those, so I appreciate being able to go back to those. I want to take a step back and just talk about how we got here. So we've overperformed. We got 8 tenants. So we have 8 tenants who need, we have 10 tenants. We need 9 of them need cook spaces. And this is an existing building, which doesn't have any back of house space. So we have nowhere to deal with the loading, the deliveries, the cook spaces that are needed for those tenants. So we've been trying mightily to try to figure out how to accommodate all of that. If we were starting with a blank slate, we wouldn't have windows on that back of house space, to be honest, but we're dealing with an existing condition. And we have had changes along the way, and I appreciate the comments about, that's why we're here tonight. We know we need approval to be able to move forward. Just a couple clarifications in the code. I mean, the code does say Plan Commission may approve window of area obstructions of types and amounts not specified for first floor windows for uses upon finding that strict compliance is impracticable under the circumstances, and the proposal includes amenities that address those adverse effects. And one of the reasons is for specialty food retailers. That's right out of the town center requirements 58-301. The design center guidelines also talk about the fact that we need to have commercial uses have to have at least 60% of their ground floor front elevation with transparent windows. There'll be all transparent windows on the front elevation, which is the one that faces Mequon Road. This elevation we're talking about doesn't face a public street. It faces the side, faces one of the other buildings. But we have all of these challenges, the existing condition. This is the one we care about the most of the one that you're gonna hear about tonight, because this one has the biggest cost associated with it and the biggest delay potentially to what's being proposed and how we get to be a step where we can move forward now. So the proposal that you're seeing now is what we're proposing. We are looking at covering those windows so that you're not seeing the cooking spaces with spandrel glass. We're dealing with also the intersection of fire code issues, health code issues, as well as the town center issues, and that's sort of what brought us to the changes along the way when we were sort of getting mixed messaging, because everybody's looking at a different perspective of the code. Obviously, fire safety and being sure we're safe is number one. That requires that we be able to have those hoods open, but also, screened and not with combustible material. One of the concerns we have about the wood panel proposal that's being recommended by city staff is there's a combustible material right there, which I don't think, and the architects can speak better to the specifics of it. But our proposal is, again, to cover those windows, which, again, are interior facing to the rest of the development with spandrel glass. And do you guys want to talk about more detail?
I'll let Mark, but I wanted to just reiterate something. One thing that evolved during the design, we started really talking to tenants, I'd say in the fall of last year, and it's been evolving pretty quickly. And we really needed, we knew when we started this building that we didn't have a backside to this building, but we had to make choices about where the best place to put, I call them the heavy lifters. We're currently designing a number of new market buildings, and in the case of a new market building, you kind of make choices a little differently than here. The florist, for example, doesn't need a hood, but this happened over a period of time, and there were really, so we chose this facade to put most of the back of house along as the designs evolved, and each tenant was a different design challenge. So that's kind of, and we believe pretty strongly, after considering all the options, that the spandrel glass solution is really the best option, because it really is glass. We all know we've all seen spandrel glass, and then we also wanted to encourage as much transparency into the tenants as we could as well. So that's those achieving both. And Deborah just mentioned, we are balanced as this question evolved. We had to satisfy a number of issues, code being one of them, and resulting in a solution we thought made the most sense. So the other thing that, not that things are going to change, but the glass solution, things could change inside, and the solution we have could evolve on the inside, where we could bring transparency back if that made sense for the internal. And it's interesting seeing markets evolve. They do change. They will change. But you saw the market downtown is most of the vendors have changed, not that these will change. But that's, they live with what's there primarily. They work with whatever's there, so we don't expect a lot of change inside. So Mark wants to talk technically about the detail we came up with.
Yeah, I'll just be real quick. With the three options that were presented to you, I think there's some fundamental issues that relate to constructability, architectural design, building design. Of course, that part is subjective. But in our response, when we look at those, the one option that talks about adding the wood into it, there's the fundamental problems there is that that's a full window replacement, and then requiring us to add additional jamb thickness to support the header, to support the upper window, and then in addition to that, trying to make sure that that is all fire rated because it is a Type 2B construction. That if we're putting that exterior flammable wood on there, we have to have that full assembly. So by the time we're done with all the necessary flashing, etc., it really wouldn't have the intent that was intended, I think, with their design concept to go into that. But taking a bigger step back, when the plan was, when the PUD plan was put together, we had all the existing windows in there, and that's what we had put in, and the driving force to try to maintain all these windows. We chose to replace all of the glass block with translucent glazing where we could start, and this was before tenants were known or what the use of this facility was going to be. The PUD was based on an unknown tenant and it being a white box essentially that we're putting together. Once we got through that whole process, we got the muttons put back into it to kind of represent stuff that you see here on City Hall, to go back to the industrial flavor of the buildings. And again, I heard some of the Plan Commission members talk about that we were trying to go towards that a little bit cleaner, more sophisticated industrial look that we wanted to maintain. So as the tenants came in, and all of a sudden we have all these windows that have already been replaced, we have the mezzanine come in, okay? The mezzanine is still held back 18 inches off the plane of the glass, but we're, covering that edge. And then as we found out individual tenants were coming in, they had some hood issues that were obscuring some of the glass, and that's where all those discussions came into play on there. So when we look at those, when we hear those options, we're kind of a little befuddled on the, I guess, the rejection or opposition to our proposed plan when we hear one of the options is to just remove the windows and block them in. That seems counterintuitive to what the goals of the original PUD was. And to continue on that process, to get that developed, we firmly believe that the best option is to do that spandrel glass. Now, Jenny has a sample of here to show you guys what that is. The spandrel glass doesn't mean that you're not picking up the reflections, etc. Those of you that are in architecture, know what I'm referring to, but essentially your light is going through 3 different glass surfaces before it hits that dark area in the back. That dark area is no different than you having your windows obscured here with the mini blinds, or the obscuring in the windows in the bathrooms in here. It's the same thing. We had chose black, but we can certainly look at different options for doing that. But at the end of the day, when someone's walking down the street, they're picking up all the reflections from the sun, all the movement outside, all that is still coming off the glass. I think historically people used to look at spandrel glass as though that was like a metal panel that was stuck on the face of it and it just was dull and didn't look good. These new ones here, you're still going to pick up all those reflections, and we think that because this is being put together from the outside of the building, that essentially what the plan is that bottom half where you see the window is actually 2 separate windows that are molded together. So you have the one on top, which is at the mezzanine level, that lights up the floor on the mezzanine, and then these 6 panels down below. Those 6 panels come out, the glass is replaced in there. We still maintain all the muttons that are in place in there, and then we insert that window back in there. And then we have everything covered in the case where it's just obscuring the view inside of it. There was a request to do some of the additional frits on the outside of the glass. That is an option from a purely subjective architectural viewpoint. We think that the simplest and cleanest method is option A, and I think people would see that when it's all said and done and be happy with what's there. But again, to us, that if you're obscuring a glass surface from behind, that should be really favorable over the idea of actually removing a window and blocking it in. That goes completely against everything that we come to understand about the town center concepts. I don't know. Jenny, Cindy?
So I guess another point would be that we did get approved plans for each space. Maybe you could go to that slide, Jack, that's in there. So we were required to submit each tenant's build-out that showed where the vents were, and we were required to get a building permit for each space. So as we got our tenants, we had state and city approved plans for each one of these spaces. So we weren't trying to pull something off here. We really truly thought that we were doing what was what staff wanted by keeping the windows open. And Jenny spent a lot of time working with the health inspector and the building inspector, and it wasn't until this kind of fire safety issue came up and we had to move along, that we created the detail to close the vents.
Jack?
Just a couple follow-up things. The mention of this not being a public street. I mean, for all intents and purposes, we're treating it as a public street. We have landscaping, we have lighting, we have sidewalks. This will appear to be similar to a public street. And
But it's not publicly
Oh, can I-
dedicated, and we have the
can I
cost of
finish?
maintaining
You
it.
can follow up, but do not interrupt.
She mentioned Mequon Road. One of the reasons why we were so concerned about the windows is Mequon Road doesn't meet the 60% requirement in our code because it's an existing building, which obviously we had to work with the confines of what we had. But this elevation doesn't meet the 60% either, and with all the windows being unobstructed. So as we continue to obstruct more windows, we get further and further from that code requirement. And the other issue I think it's important. They stated that in fall they started talking with the tenants and laying out designs. We didn't have any conversation with them until, again, mid to late March with regard to these issues. And I guess I'll take responsibility. I'm sure Kim was here, she'd take responsibility. Unfortunately, in our desire to continue this project along, we got a little bit too far into it without getting to these issues, and now we've kind of put you guys in a tough spot to try to figure them out. If we would have known this back in fall, that these were the issues, I think we'd have tried to come up with a lot better solutions, and I think we would not be having this conversation today. But we were not involved in this process. Yes, we did issue state-approved plans. That was after a conversation that there was going to be a discussion to work some of these things out, and that never really went anywhere. Again, we were under pressure to make sure that the tenants keep moving on and that they get their opening done, and we were willing to, help them as much as possible. But again, I think, the path to hell's paved with good intentions. In this case, I think we maybe went too far, and now we're in a position where we're trying to come up with options that may not be optimal. And yes, our solutions cover up some of those windows, or some of our options cover up some of those windows, and that is contrary to what we're trying to achieve, but it's no different than the spandrel glass. I mean, at least the options we were trying to provide had some architectural features that were consistent with the building, and it wasn't just a shortcut to cover up the windows. With regard to the building code issues, again, Paul's here. He can answer any of your questions or address any issues. There was no compelling reason why they could not have kept some of those windows open with building code, fire code, or health code. There was ways of doing it. This was just one option. It was probably the most expedient option, was to cover the windows off completely. And I don't believe putting the wood panels on the exterior of the building would have a negative issue in terms of any kind of fire rating, because it's outside the building and it's outside the envelope. So those are just some of our thoughts. Again, we are not supportive of the options they're presenting in front of you. I think we need a little bit more of a detailed look at this, and hopefully we can come up with some consensus. But I just wanted to add those comments.
Thank you. Sorry for speaking out of turn. We have the state-approved plans that were signed by staff that are clear, dated July of 2018. We're not trying to hide the 8 ball. We tried to disclose as soon as we knew anything that was coming down the pike. It's been a challenge to be able to work through these issues, but we've also, as you heard from our architects, come up with what we think is the best design solution also, which is the spandrel option, to provide us a back of house that we don't have from an existing building. So we appreciate the comments and look forward to answering any questions you have.
July of 2018 were not the tenant build-outs. They were basically a white box, which does not give them approvals to do any type of floor plan layouts or anything like that. The white box is issued first. The mezzanine was issued in February of 2019, and the individual tenant spaces were issued in late March of 2019.
We have the plans with the dates.
Screaming Tuna was July of 2018.
Mr. Parrish.
Okay. So obviously, this is kind of the root of all the topics. I was really fortunate to have a walk with Cindy around the site, and it is honestly the most amazing development I think we've worked on as a commission in recent history. this public market is absolutely incredible. No detail was spared. Just like the staff spares no detail in analyzing what we approved and what they think we're expecting as a commission. But I guess my point is that I sincerely do not believe, and I'm kind of hearing this a little bit, that maybe the developer made decisions that just on their own, and I guess I do not subscribe to that at all, respectfully. I think that every detail is tried to be covered. It's a really comprehensive development, and so it's easy to pick out little things. Now, my final point is that I don't think that anything should be held up tonight. Like, I think part of the panic here is that they're worried about delivering on occupancy June 1 for their tenants. And I hate rushing decisions and design concepts, for the sake of this meeting, but I also think that we cannot hold that up at all. I mean, I think the project has reached substantial completion. I appreciate the staff's recommendations for their design concepts, but at this point, I mean, that would be very costly to totally pivot away from what we already approved, even though it looks neat. Spandrel glass, it looks fine at this point. It's better than looking at the hoods, which I honestly do not believe were done intentionally. And so let's move forward here, and this should be a really positive thing. Staff did an excellent job. They've been short-staffed too. I mean, Kim has been out of the office, so I think everyone's been doing what they can to get us live here. And that's my little comment.
Mr. Lemke, quick question. The drywall around the hoods, was any other option that allowed light in and out in play on that? Why was it just drywalled over?
When you say the drywall around the hood, you talking about the window opening itself and then going up. Because of where the hoods had to go because of the kitchen requirements and their layouts of how they have to function as a business, we did have some places where those hoods were going across some of the windows. Now, with that, from the state and from code perspective, the way that it was originally done was to leave those windows open. And we had the drywall going in and going all the way around, and everything was fire rated in there because of the type of construction that it is. The request, as I understood it, as presented from the owner, was that the city no longer wanted to see those hoods and that we needed to cover those up. The option then was presented to create that spandrel with that panel on the inside of the building so that they could cover that with the metal. But the way we originally had the whole thing was that the window was open, that you would be able to see in, except for where the hood was blocking the windows.
And again, why did we have to go to drywall to block that? Why couldn't we use wired glass, something like that?
Yeah, there was some, there was a discussion when they had a separate meeting of just the 3 inspectors and city staff that we were not part of. We were told that there was fire issues there that had to be resolved. And so the solution that was presented that everyone agreed upon was putting in that panel to enclose that space completely.
Just for clarification, everybody being, you said everybody agreed upon.
Well, it was the owners, city staff, and
staff
inspectors.
Okay. Now, I should clarify, I'm not here on behalf of the fire department. I do some
understood.
inspections, but my understanding is a wired glass would be appropriate in that case, so that you'd have light coming in and out.
No, the type of glass isn't the issue. They had concern that they were looking at the inspection that it wasn't completed yet because they were trying to figure out what we were going to do, is that there was some foam that we have on the inside of the building which was still exposed at the time, which needed to be drywalled over yet. That part of the detail hasn't been resolved, but there was no issue with the type of glass that was being put in there.
I guess I'm still trying to clarify, from the hood down, why does that have to be closed off? Why can't that be some type of glass in there?
That, there was 2 things. The local inspector believed that needed to be enclosed, and that's part of their purview with the fire department, how they want that. The fire departments have the legal authority to go above and beyond what the code requirements are to meet the city's building inspector, sorry. So there's that part of it, and then it also does make things a lot easier for the tenants to have a washable surface that is doesn't have the glazing on there, so this is just a continuous on the inside from their cook surface to the hood is a stainless steel surface that they can then wash.
And we have the. city
Yeah, Mr.
inspector.
Leonard, you wanna respond, please?
So when we were on site,
Can you talk into the microphone?
sorry. When we were on site, we saw the hoods located there. Our temporary inspector was there, one helping us out, and he's allowed them to continue drywalling except for the hood area because we had concerns about how the fire department, health department, and the building code was being addressed with these hoods. As you look between the window and the back of the hood was still open. So it was feeding into the spray foamed stud wall and into the floor joist system. So we had concerns about fire stopping and all that type of stuff, and the exposed foam that may be toxic when it burns. So we started asking questions on how it was being finished and what they were doing with the windows. We contacted State of Wisconsin, had a discussion with Randy Dahman, who said the health department would never pass this with the windows being open. It wouldn't be a cleanable surface. So we contacted health department. Health department admitted that they felt that that would have been a cleanable surface when it was finished, whether they reach up behind there or not. There's any number of ways to have a hood in front of a window. The solution that they're proposing right now is a viable solution to the building code. We never said that it was acceptable to the community development. It would be acceptable to us. It would be acceptable to the fire department, and the health department was happy with it. But they didn't satisfy the planning commission or community development. They could have left the windows open at the lower level, closed it off at the top and bottom, and had two open windows leading in. That would have been a viable option. There's any number of ways to solve this problem. They chose this way, and after the meeting that we had with staff and Spur 16, mayor was there, city administrator was there, we allowed them to proceed at their own risk, subject to your approval.
So there is an alternative where we could have light coming in and out those windows.
Absolutely.
Other questions? Mr. Joran?
Can we go back to the spandrel options? I mean, you've got the condition where you're visually seeing a hood, seeing the framing for the mezzanine, the cooler, and the half height wall, right? So if we look at those spandrel options.
Are you looking? This one here you're looking for?
Or that one, yeah. Let's see if, I wanna make sure I understand. Option A is the top two panels would be vision panels, so light would come into the mezzanine, but everything below that would be the spandrel, right?
Only in front of the hoods, though.
Pardon?
Not in every window, only in front of the hoods.
Right. And option B and C, what's a B and C?
When you say top two panels, you mean 1/4 of the window, correct?
Right.
Two squares.
Right. So option B and C, so you've got the vision panels up at the top and then different treatments below that.
It was in an effort to create some pattern. After we met with Kim, after this meeting, we found that we needed to enclose the windows where the hoods were located, and this spandrel glass was proposed, not approved by the city, but proposed as a good option from our architects. Kim came and met with Cindy and myself, and we walked in front of the market, and she had asked that we come up with some options to create some pattern to those windows, so it didn't look like it was a mistake to have 5 windows on one facade be spandrel glass and the rest to be clear. And I just want to say that we worked with our tenants to keep these windows clear in front of their hoods, which they were not in favor of because it is not an easy cleanable surface, although I did meet with the health department and I did meet with the fire inspector, and they both said that it was an issue. Then there was the meeting where they met with Paul, and there was a building code issue. So it was proposed to us, and I have the email where it says, please work with your architects, the state reviewers, and the Department of Health to deal with these hoods in front of the windows. And that was when Mark and Dave came up with the spandrel glass idea. When you look at the facade today and you see the way the sunlight hits these windows, having the spandrel glass in front of the window and having the clear window in the daylight really doesn't look much different. The reflection of everything that's behind you, which would be St. Paul Fish in the parking lot, is really what you see. Option B and C and D were at the request of Kim to come up with a way to just create a pattern on the windows that would be acceptable to her. And she had sent me some examples of other storefront windows with this type of treatment. And that was what we came up with. Our opinion is option A really will look the best. And I think that if we were to put it in, you would agree. It's hard to see with the way you take photographs today, and you take a photograph up close, you can see through, but in reality, when you walk by, having the spandrel glass and the not obscured windows without the fritz would really look the best.
Now, that detail that was in a package that showed infilling the window opening on the inside with a surface aligned with the inside surface of the wall, that creates that clean washable surface, right?
It does.
Which would go up to the underside of the mezzanine.
Exactly. So you would, correct.
Right.
Commissioner, to help you understand the windows, the way they're put together is the top two grids that you see up on the top. That is one window frame that then is mulled together with the six, which is again one window system down below. And that's how they're put together. So the spandrel would cover the bottom six, and the top would remain clear on all of them.
So this option A would address seeing the mezzanine framing, seeing the hood, the coolers. I guess my remaining question is, what were you proposing to address the half-height wall on the north elevation?
Jack, if you could move it to the next slide.
On that half-height wall, keep in mind that wall is beyond the 18 inches required by the town ordinance.
It's almost 20 inches off of the window.
Yeah, but what we have on there, as you can see, was to put a logo to dress that up, to carry on some of that language coming around. Again, that was a large garage door, opaque garage door, when we took over the project, and we've replaced it with storefront to make everything much more visible. So that whole area there floods the whole back side of the building, those two garage doors, with a lot of natural light.
And what's
coming all the
great
way through.
about that facade and that knee wall where the sinks are installed is the public can walk by and look inside and see a working kitchen. So it really is interactive with the community, and really, I think, a great solution, rather than obscuring it completely.
It would be hard to put spandrel in just to obscure that wall, I mean, because it doesn't go all the way across the opening. I mean, I like the option A, the B, C, and D. I'm not entirely sure you need more promotion of the public market. I mean, it's a little branding could go too far sometimes, I think.
Yeah.
So, I guess.
I just want to clarify, there is no 18-inch rule of obstruction depth. So it's basically, the code says you can't obstruct the windows. It does allow shelving, but the shelving has to be at least 4 feet away from the window.
That's just one quick question. How far down do the hoods come on the windows? You've got the grid of 8. If you could open the space below the hood, how much would that open up?
I believe that is, well, actually, correct me if I'm wrong, Jenny, it's basically 1.5 on the bottom. But again, that is one window unit with the muttons inside of the glass there. So there you can see it. So it's about 1.5, a little less than 1.
And just to be clear, I mean, I think we would have had more options. Unfortunately, this is where we are today, and I realize that that's something we've done to ourselves, but we were working with building inspection, health inspection, planning, getting somewhat inconsistent direction, and we went one direction, and this is where we are. I don't think we're at a point today where we can cost effectively change out all the windows.
I think this addresses your question, Commissioner Lemke, with how far those hoods hang down.
Thank you.
Alderman Strelchak.
How many windows were approved to be obstructed?
There was only 3 windows that were discussed at the PC meeting in June of 2018 to be obstructed.
Okay, well, I knew the answer to that. I just wanted to ask for the public record. So we're really talking about 2 additional windows. You know, I think there's a lot of talk about the history and everything else, and I was probably the most adamant person with MTC1 about obstructing windows. I mean, I hate obstructed windows in a walkable community where you can go and you can shop and you can do everything else. Where it bothered me the most on MTC1 when they came forward and they wanted to obstruct windows and then they wanted to obstruct more windows after the first few were approved, was that the intent of that was more of a retail space. This has never been talked about a retail market. It's been talked about a public market, which has a known use downtown as being a food place, an eating place, a dining place. So where I don't like the bright silver of the hoods in front of the windows, my understanding is there's a cover for those anyway. Isn't there a cover for those for the bright silver anyway, which is a darker color? I mean, for me, if that was painted black, I don't know that I would even have really objected to it. I don't love the fact that they're drywalled in, but it's done. So moving forward, I don't know that I have a real reason to correct the entire opening of the window tonight. You know, I really feel that you were allowed 3. This discussion was in June of last year when we were talking about this. You have 10 tenants. You're looking to open sooner than expected. Restaurants have needs. Restaurant need hoods. You didn't know which restaurants were coming in, how many would need hoods. It's not like a chocolatier's going in where they just have a walk-in cooler you could have put off to the side. The types of restaurants, like, you know, we're allowed to cover windows as a planning commission, like because of public interest and things like that. You have 10 restaurants coming in. I mean, I literally cannot wait to eat lunch here.
Neither can we.
The spandrel glass to me would be a fine solution. I don't support the wood. I think in 5-10 years it would probably look hideous. I think breaking it in would be completely ridiculous. I think it would change the feel of the building even more than what we're trying to avoid tonight. And the spandrel glass being a black glass, I mean, I don't love that they're covered, but I understand the need, and I understand the restaurants that would go in there. And for me, if this was coming forward tonight and the restaurants weren't even in there yet and you were asking for this, okay, that's reasonable. I support that. I'd ask you if there's a way that you could divert it and do something different. And if you went through the whole health code discussion and the inability to wipe down the glass behind, and it being, I worked in a restaurant, I know how hard that is. You know, your kids that you're bringing up through the community, your employees that you're bringing up from the high school and the college level, they're gonna clean pretty well, but they're not gonna clean like the owner. So I get it, and I support the spandrel glass.
Just a point of clarification, originally there was 3 on the east side. There's now 5 on the east side and a half, and then there's 2 in the back corner. So it's not from 3 to 5.
I'm going to be really blunt here. I get the fact that it's a for use and it's going to feel like a public street, but the bottom line is we're micromanaging the interior of this project. And I think reviewing it is a positive thing. I think bringing it forward here, but I think overanalyzing it at this point, they got 10 restaurants coming in that the community's been asking for years. They need hoods and they need some of the windows covered so those restaurants can effectively go in and the marketplace can be filled. A half-filled marketplace is going to be about a 10th as effective as a fully filled one. You go in and you got a craving for one meal and you see 6 other that you're going to come back for night after night after night. I mean, I get exactly the business plan for this building and I know why it's going to be so successful. I don't disagree with it. So separating the issues, these 5 windows, I don't have a problem with any of them being spandrel glass. In the front, if we want to discuss something else.
It's 6 windows.
Yeah,
It's not 5, it's 6. And
8, actually.
what?
It's 8 windows.
8 actually.
Yeah,
Okay.
8 and then 2 more, but 6 on that side,
Yeah.
which
It's
is
a
the
total
most
of 8
visible
windows.
side
Yeah.
of the building.
Okay.
I'd speak up just one point, and that is, yeah, we're doing this at the last minute. It wasn't staff's job to bring this up at the last minute. It was the applicant's job to come forward when they had plans that changed the the external plans for the building, when they had a need, it should have come to the planning commission. Now, I'm not that hung up about this, although I think it looks hideous right now. And everybody I've walked through, which has been about 8 people down that street, thinks this looks ridiculous. Although actually it's the mezzanine floor that looks almost worse than the woods, including where it's been colored. But maybe with a spandrel glass, because I'm not an architect, I'll defer to the 2 architects here. But this is not staff being overly picky. This is staff following through, perhaps belatedly, in trying to work with the applicant on something that the applicant should have come to us 4 months ago, at the time they were doing the internal plans, to ask for a change to the external plan that they got approved. If our approval means nothing, then we should stop wasting applicants' time submitting it. I don't have a problem if we lighten our standards on some things, if that's what the commission wants to do. But we ought to be consistent in how we apply the rules that the commission has. And if the commission, if an applicant comes forward, I love the development, but let's not put this in a place that it doesn't belong. This is not an issue created by our staff. Any other comments, Mr. Schaefer?
On the east side of this building, I looked at it on Thursday, and I understand the need, given what we have to work with. We're gonna have an extremely dark tint or spandrel glass on windows 3, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Are you proposing that the other windows, the other lower windows have clear glass?
Yes, and maybe Dave could speak to this because he has experience with putting in spandrel glass in buildings.
So I was the on-site project manager for the last 2 Northwestern Mutual Towers over the last 6 years before this project. Anyone can look at those buildings on the news, and on the first NM tower, 15'9" floor to floor. Out of every single floor, 5 feet of the glass is spandrel glass. Whether anyone knew that or not, 5 feet of every single floor is spandrel glass. You can't tell, the common person cannot tell. It will keep with the same look that is on the approved plans here. Different material, it's glass, but just block glass. But to the common eye, no one will be able to tell a difference.
I guess what, looking at this one handout, you have.
You talking to the microphone, Jim? Or louder?
And looking at the east elevation that was in our staff report, I wonder, we have 5 windows that have spandrel glass, then we have 5 other windows that have some spandrel glass to hide the second floor construction, and then it's clear glass below. I guess what I like to see is 5 windows would have spandrel glass, then windows 1, 2, 4, 5, and 6 would have a dark tint at the bottom. So you wouldn't have clear, you wouldn't have so many different variations.
Would it be helpful to clarify exactly what we're proposing for each one of the windows?
I think if you show, Jack, if you can put the slide that I put together, that's the actual picture of the building today, and it points out.
Jenny, can you also talk in the microphone?
Sorry. If you go up, where we point out where the spandrel glass is, yep. Unfortunately, it's really dark. I don't know if it looks any better when you're closer to it. So where it says mezzanine I-beam is covered, those 3 windows, this isn't a great picture to look at the way it's showing up here, but you really can't see it. This I-beam, the 4th window, is not covered. Then if you go over 2 more, that dark window, that will be the consistent theme across all the windows on that east facade. What you're looking at today is unfinished windows, not completely treated windows, but in the end, this spandrel glass technique will obscure what you don't want to see and blend with the others. It's not as though you're going to see completely through and not see through. It's not drastic from one window to the next. It'll be imperceptible.
But you're only proposing that on 5 windows.
Exactly.
And the other windows would have clear glass on the bottom.
And if you look at this picture, it ends up, yes, the answer is yes, but if you look at this picture, you can't see through it. It's not like daylight is coming through.
So just to be clear, and correct me if I'm wrong, the first windows that you see on the left side, those will be clear. It's the ones that are the 5 to the right would be spandrel.
I realize that.
But at night, they'll be,
At night, it would look
at
different.
night's when you're gonna see the difference.
That's why I would prefer to see a dark tint on 2, 4, 5, and 6 on the bottom. So that at least the windows in the back, would there be some uniformity, and the windows in the front would have some uniformity, rather than 1 here and 3 here.
I think the only thing that changes is the interior light source that comes in, which everybody wants light coming into the building, and I believe that the kitchens and the public would like to see through, so if you tint it, now the whole inside becomes dark.
Well, I guess I'd like to see some tint, not absolutely clear on the bottom sash. That's my only
Is it
comment.
a tinted grating to this window already? It's not a clear view window.
There's something. Jack, can we turn off some lights so we can see this better?
Turn the front ones off.
It's a lot better than the print out.
Jack, actually, if you could take the slide to the one that actually shows, the drawing of the elevation with all the windows that are, obscured.
That's better. So Jim, which, okay.
These windows have spandrel glass.
Those 5.
Those,
This one. The others would be clear except for the mezzanine frame. Or I suggest at the bottom of these just a little tint, not absolutely clear. I just think there's too much variation.
I would have to agree with that. I wouldn't wanna see anything that would limit the sun coming into that building though. It's already gonna have a bit of a dark feel that I don't think you wanna tint those windows.
So, I'm gonna make an attempt at a motion.
Here we go.
On the east elevation, where the client is showing proposed spandrel glass, we would go with option A. On the remaining windows, the lower 3/4 of the glazing be a slightly darker tint to be closer to looking like the spandrel. On the west elevation, the windows that view the coolers be spandrel glass, and on the north elevation, where the knee wall is, that the signage that they proposed on the face be accepted.
I'd agree with that. I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. Any
Can you repeat the
discussion?
very last part about the knee wall?
He's got a question too.
On the knee wall, on the north side, where they have proposed putting spur 16 image on that knee wall and not affecting the glazing, that's what I'm suggesting.
Ms. Tomczyk?
Thank you.
Well,
Ms. Schaefer?
you guys, honestly, we don't want to do anything that doesn't look great. We've spent millions of dollars on this project, and one of the reasons that people came here is because of the look and the style and the aesthetic of this building. We feel that the spandrel will be imperceptible based on our experience. I'm willing to entertain the tint option, but if it's possible to wait, because I think we feel strongly, Jenny and I agree with our tenants, we have that whole front portion, the whole south part is an open area and anodyne coffee, and we don't want to tint those windows. If it would prevent sunlight from coming into this very large building. So with all due respect, I would ask that we do the spandrel glass, and the knee wall, but we wait on the tinting of the windows. And I'm willing to come back. I hate to do that, but if you think it looks awful after it's done and the market's open, I will come back and tint the glass. You can have that on there, but I would respectfully ask that we not do that. I feel that it would be detrimental to the interior of this building.
Well, I wasn't asking for a dark tint, just a light tint.
I'd rather not tint it. I don't know, do the architects how do you feel about that? I mean, I think we're degrading what we have in this building. We could have just left in the black windows and none of us would have to be here tonight.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea to wait. We can change it, but I think it'd be great if it got done and then we can take a look at it.
Yeah, and I also echo that, because the one thing is when people look at elevations of a building like this, nobody ever sees a building from this view. You see everything at a 30-degree angle as you're driving down the road. So on those corners, you're going to have the clear glazing from the front and then the partially tinted from the side. And I do think that at the end of the day that's going to actually end up not looking as good, because you're going to be able to see through it and you're going to wonder, why is this portion of the glass darker than everything else?
I guess as I think about that, if the top quarter is gonna be clear anyways, I guess I wasn't aware that that front portion was gonna be an open seating area. I guess I would delete that portion of my.
How many windows are in open seating? Is it 2 or 5?
Mr. Parrish, it looked like you wanted to say something.
Jump in front of Rob. My only comment was gonna be, I'm okay waiting 6 months if it has to look consistent ultimately. That's what you want.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't look consistent, then they should come back and tint it, like you're saying.
If we feel it doesn't look consistent.
So is that a friend, you're willing to have that?
Yes.
What's the time period? And staff will look at it and
I would prefer
decide
the
whether to bring
architects.
that back.
I would prefer that the architects could look at it and let me know instead of us making that decision.
Oh, but what time period?
Your architects or my architects?
Our architects.
Rob?
I just would also like to mention that if we do come back after I support the 6-month wait, and I think once they get in the space, that east sun can get kind of bright. They may want to tint those anyway. They may want to tint the whole window. Who knows? But what I would want to recommend that we do is address the percentage of tint, like a little tint, how much tint, and I think Commissioner Schaefer would like to have just a little more say into like what that tint means, what his intent
That's when
was.
it comes back, right?
Yeah, but I mean, if it does come back and it's requested that it's done, I'd like to address what tint is recommended and, maybe see what those samples mean or something like that, if we do get to that phase, so that you're not tinting at a percentage that we may or may not like. And, again, one final decision if it does come back, and we'll move on.
Yeah, I think what we would do is at that point, we would bring in the full range of samples of what's available and then work with you guys to select the one that would look best.
We have a long agenda, so we don't need to decide what's gonna happen 6 months from now. Anybody else? And Mr. Brock?
Just to be clear, that on those 5 windows at the end, you're talking about 4 for the spandrel glass, not the one way at the end, correct, on that side. There's 4 arrows and there's 5 windows. You're not talking about the one on the end, just those 4. Correct.
What's the deal with kitchen hood location and the 3 in between under our?
Jack, can you put our illustration up there?
I'm in under the motion, not, I've seen your illustration,
Well, those are clear on the bottom
and you're gonna leave them clear.
for 6 months.
except for the one that's in the middle,
Right, right.
the one that says that.
Right.
Okay, I just wanna make sure we're, there is one window that's partially blocked, but we're only talking about putting spandrel glass on 5, why not 6?
If you go down 3 slides, you can see which ones, it's easier to see on there.
I'm not sure what slide you're referring to.
Yeah, right there, yeah. So if you look in the upper right-hand corner,
5 on the east.
And aren't there 6 windows that are obstructed on the east?
There's a partial, window that's obstructed by that Ansel system.
That we weren't covering, so we had five windows on the east, right?
Yeah.
And then
Which is the
two
6th
on the
window,
west.
Jack?
Window number 6.
I really don't want to cover the answer system. It's 12 inches of window.
just for the plan commission, when they refer to the Ansel system, that's not over the cooking surface. That's outside of the cooking surface.
This is the,
It would be a shame to cover that one out.
And we'd only be covering
5. This is being,
Well, I'm asking the movement.
Mr. Mayor, do you want to ask?
If, well, it's partially covered anyway. That's the one you talking about the one with the kitchen hood?
no, this is an Ansel one. This is adjacent to the isolated one.
Oh,
Yeah, I think you can see it. It's the 5th window in.
Change out the spandrel glass, it's not permanent.
I just want it as is.
What was that?
I'd keep it as it is. Here it's shown just clear.
And you'd leave it clear, and that obstruction in the window. And nobody has any issues with the drop ceilings that are also shown in a couple of the windows that were never part of the planning commission approvals.
The drop ceilings will be blacked out. There'll be, like, the treatment that we used for the mezzanine. That, right now, you're just looking at the structure that the ceiling goes into. That's not complete at that point.
Won't look like that when it's done.
Those will be painted on black.
Yes.
Okay. That helps.
But it's still pretty conspicuous. So we have a motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion and the second, or on the motion?
Is it amended?
Well, it's amended to be, let's make it real clear. Jim, would you repeat the motion as it currently exists?
Did you make it? Marty made it.
Or Marty did,
Okay.
sorry.
On the east elevation, accept the proposed locations for the spandrel glass. On the windows that are remaining, clear that the city reserves the right in a 6-month period to analyze and determine whether a tinted glass should be added to the lower 3/4 of those windows. On the west elevation, the 2 windows that conceal the walk-in coolers be spandrel glass, and on the north elevation, that the knee wall be accepted with the Spur 16 logo on it.
We have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? No. I'll just say, I'm gonna vote for it because I think that there's a consensus. I'm not real crazy about the resolution. Not crazy that we're in this position. But I'm not sure that we're gonna go anywhere if, I don't think my no vote means anything, so. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? There, ayes have it.
Mayor, just to clarify why we're in this position,
No,
Nope.
I'm sorry, we're gonna keep going through the agenda. You
you
got a chance to
approved,
talk.
you approved the permits that showed where everything was months ago, and we're getting blamed for it. It
That's a
just doesn't seem
construction
fair.
permit, it's not an exterior, and you know the
It's a layout.
difference.
It shows exactly where everything is.
That's it's a construction permit, it's not a planning commission approval, and you know the difference. The next item is the mechanical screening for the public market.
Actually, yes, I do have a picture, and I'm assuming this one won't take that long. When they were in front of the commission in June, they received approval to allow the hoods to be left unscreened on the east elevation. There was no discussion of the hoods on the west elevation, which I'm trying to find a picture of. So they're asking for a waiver to not screen those mechanical equipment on that elevation as well. Staff does not have an issue with that. I think the issue when we talked in June about the east elevation is that any screening would probably look worse than what the hoods look in the current situation. So I found the picture. So gotta rotate this. This is a different.
Jack, there's little arrows up on the top.
I'm not sure why this opened in office, so, but, so basically, if, you can kind of make it out, there's hoods, 3 or 4 hoods on that, west elevation where we're not supporting any, screening materials on that elevation. So for that, we do recommend them to remain as is.
I'm assuming you don't need to comment.
No, we agree, but just to be clear, it's the mushroom vents. They're not hoods. They're not HVAC units. They're mushroom vents.
Is there a motion?
So moved. Second.
A motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Rotating.
The ayes have it. The next item is the mechanical screening on the St. Paul's Fish Market.
In this instance, we disagree with the request to screen those, or to not screen those. I have several pictures. This kind of shows it. I'm struggling with trying to rotate this. I think I can maybe do it here. Rotate.
Mayor, didn't we which building did we discuss?
The public market.
That was the market. This is the St. Paul. I don't know why it's not letting me rotate it when I try to rotate it. There's the 2 mushroom vents that are located on the building. They're visible from both traveling westbound on Mequon Road as well as eastbound on Mequon Road. There is other screening on the building for other mechanicals. They did not include the mushroom vents inside that screening area. They did show it at the time of the approvals, but there was a condition in the report that stated that all mechanicals had to be screened. So we're still recommending them to be screened and incorporated within that existing enclosure.
Mayor? So these are the same mushroom vent treatments that you just approved to not have screened on the public market. Now we're talking about them on the top of the St. Paul's building. We do not want them screened. The requirement was that mechanical units, the HVAC units, be screened. These are not HVAC units, they're mushroom vents, and they were shown on the plan from day one.
Well,
as they're shown here without any screening.
if you read the code section, they're applicable to be screened. It basically talks about any ventilation equipment, which this falls under. If there's a discussion whether these to be screened or not, that's actually a Board of Appeals matter. It's not necessarily a Planning Commission matter. We believe that under the ordinance, they're required to be screened, and we support them being screened within the enclosure that's up on the rooftop.
Could you explain the differentiation between your 2 approvals or your 2 recommendations?
Yeah, and when we looked at the market building, obviously the design of that building would be very difficult to incorporate a rooftop enclosure that would look aesthetically pleasing with the building. I think in this case, they have a fairly nice looking enclosure that's already up there. So expanding that enclosure, I think, does not take away from the architecture of the building, and that's the difference, I think, between the 2 applications.
I would move to approve the applicant's request. As much as I understand staff's position on this, I don't think it's particularly a relevant issue, and it is consistent with the building that's going to be across from it.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, there are none.
No.
No? Okay. The next item is the master sign plan amendment.
There are several requests for the master sign plan. I'll go to their drawing. One of them is to add a sign on the clubhouse building. There's also a request to add a couple small signs in the trail in the back of the site. Staff is supportive of the sign amendment. There's a couple conditions that we did add. The first issue, the signs on the trail, they didn't show a location for them. We're just recommending that they be on private property and that the posts that are used for those signs match the town center posts, the black metal posts that we use in our town center area. The second issue, the clubhouse, we're asking that they incorporate some sort of wayfinding. And right now it just says Spur 16, but that is the office area of the clubhouse. We feel that there should be some identification in that signage to identify that building as the office or the clubhouse. And three, we did issue a permit for the St. Paul's ghosting signs back in October. Not in October, that was several months ago. One of the concerns at the time was that the ghosting didn't necessarily look like what we approved in terms of the faded character of it. We talked to the sign the individual who applied the ghosting technique, and he stated to us that by October the UV rays should fade that sign so that it looks more consistent with the approved plan. We did put in the approval of the permit that if it doesn't, if the UV does not fade it by October 1, that they would have to do some sandblasting or some technique to fade that sign. We just wanted to put that in the master sign plan just as a matter of record. It's already was approval condition of the sign permit. So, thank you.
Schaefer or Ms.?
I would agree to all of that. I mean, it was my tenant who did that, and I support him, and I would love for him to come back and talk about that in 6 months. We can do that when we do the tinting on the windows at the same time. But I agree with all the conditions that staff was.
Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Nobody's opposed. Next item, the lighting plan amendment.
This is a request to grant an after-the-fact waiver for the to the lighting code. There's two sets of lights in the development. One is on the in the parking lot, and one is in along the private roadway. The lights in the parking lot exceed the 20-foot high requirement. The ones in the roadway do not exceed the 20-foot high requirement. So their request is to keep the parking lot lights at about 22 feet in height. Staff does not support the approval of the height waiver and does recommend the poles be switched out to meet our 20-foot requirement. As an alternative, staff did put in a alternative recommendation that I tried to take a picture of some of them. Basically, in the roadway area, there's some raised concrete bases. We felt that those bases were a little too high for that roadway area. Typically, what we see is kind of what we did in our, I'm not sure why these are all coming in sideways, but basically this is in front of Cedarburg Road, the treatment of the bases being as low. So as an alternative, if the commission feels like allowing for the waiver to the height, we're recommending that those bases be screened with year-round grasses in order to kind of shadow the impact of them.
If you pull up that picture again, you can see the bottom of that pole, the one that you've highlighted.
This one?
So common practice, and it was on the plans also, but the light pole bases were set at 2 feet. We live in Wisconsin for snow plowing, maintenance, and so the poles don't deteriorate over time. That's where the light pole base height was determined. It's on the plan. That's what we went with. That's how we poured them. They're all poured right now.
Did the plan
In
show
the parking lot.
The plan show the lights over 20 feet.
The lighting plan, it did not detail the base on either one of the fixtures. The interior pole was shown at 12 feet in height. The parking lot pole was shown at 20 feet in height, but there was no detail. There was a conversation I had with the applicant with regard to the height of the base. We don't have a code requirement that dictates the height of the base, which I did relay the message to him. I did relay that the overall height is the limiting factor. Again, we don't regulate the base height, and in typical parking lot I agree a 2-foot base is appropriate in a parking lot, but staff feels with a 12-foot high decorative fixture along that road and a 2-foot base, it's a little out of scale, and I guess we would prefer obviously to have a lower base, but I think we're beyond that point. So our goal is now to basically just screen that from view, again, with some year-round grasses.
Could I ask for the picture from our PowerPoint that shows the contrast between what our poles look like and what the city's poles look like? We're not inconsistent with what's out there today. There, if you look at the one on the left, is a city pole with the similar base in the same picture. That's the city light.
From where?
This is on Bunt Rock, I would guess.
This is actually part of the old parking lot. That makes sense because this was in a parking lot at one time. This is it's a non-compliant light. It's way too high for our current code as well. And again, bases inside a parking lot, 2 foot, are very standard. We're not disagreeing with that case, but this is now basically a roadway, and that we typically don't see. We don't allow it on Cedarburg Road, and with the modifications to Industrial Road as part of the Foxtown development, we did not allow it that high as well in that area. And this is the only area we're going to have that treatment. So again, it's too late at this point to do anything about it, but we felt that an alternate approval would be to just screen that from view as best as we can.
But again, this is our private parking lot.
No, this is the roadway coming down Buntrock.
It's the private drive.
It's a drive. It's named Spur Lane or Spur Road. It has a name.
It's private, and we pay for it and plow it and all that good stuff. It's not a publicly dedicated street.
I don't see a distinction between the two in terms of the aesthetic context.
Mr. Stoker.
Where these posts where these bases are located, is it currently planned to be grassed or some sort of plantings in that area, or is it concrete beyond the base? It's hard to tell from this picture. It looks like this side of that post is gonna be grass. What about the far side of it?
It's a parallel parking space.
So there would
It's
be potential
actually
to
a
put
parking
some
space.
tall grasses that are year-round. To me, it seems like very simple. If staff's recommending that, I actually think grasses hiding that base would look better as well. I'd make a motion stating such that we require some sort of seasonal year-round grass. They're very low maintenance. I don't think you ever have to cut them. Or maybe they're very low maintenance. I would like to not see those bases as well.
That's a motion. It's to approve the variance, because it is a variance, but to require the grassing
To shield the base.
discussion to be approved by staff, I'm assuming. Yes. There's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Any discussion?
Can I ask for two quick clarifications? To the extent there's space where landscaping is, and we'd like to be able to move forward with the unapproved landscape plan without going back and forth on what the details are with staff.
Motion and a second on this. You're gonna have to go back to staff because it's not on the plan. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
That passes. The next item is the landscaping plan, including landscape plantings, bike racks, benches, and trash receptacles.
So this is a request for landscaping plan approval. It was determined at our staff meeting that the applicant needed to return to Planning Commission for approval of the landscaping plan. The only thing that was approved was the front landscaping between the buildings and Mequon Road. So the applicant's in front of the commission now to get the rest of the landscaping approved. The city forester, who I believe is still here, as well as Terry Higgins, our landscape consultant, and staff reviewed the plan. There's a number of items that we recommend in terms of the report, and I marked up a plan just so it's a little bit more evident for the commission. So basically, I'll just go through the list. So one of the requirements was that we have street trees along Buntrock Avenue. There's a hill from the sidewalk down to the buildings. And as a condition of approval from previous reports, we stated that there should be street trees in accordance with this ordinance with regard to Buntrock Avenue, since it is a public road. We also had a requirement that the Japanese tree lilacs, which are currently, I guess I'll step back a bit. A lot of the landscaping on site has been installed without the approval, so I guess we have a little bit of hindsight in terms of what was out there. And I have a picture of some of the Japanese tree lilacs that are out on site. These are basically multi-stem. These are in the parking lot in several different areas, which I'll go back to the plan and show you. We don't feel that the multi-stem application in the parking lot is appropriate. Typically, when you see Japanese tree lilac in a parking lot, it's a single stem variant versus a multi-stem. And Mike can address any questions you have with regard to why that is or is not appropriate.
Could you, instead of Mike can address, how about just as you go through, have him address?
You
Sure.
want- okay, go ahead.
So typically in a parking lot setting, even on the tree, on what we would require for city street trees, we wouldn't allow for multi-stem trees, simply because the branching starts so low that as that tree grows, it's going to inhibit any walkway and for pedestrian use, and then just vehicular traffic through that area, because it's going to either have to be pruned extremely harshly to make up for that, or it's going to be something where you're going to end up taking that tree out at a later date. So that's why we would recommend that it's just a single stem tree in that application because of those future issues.
And then the next requirement was that the trees be added in the gaps of the fencing. Those are shown on the plan in the dark circles, both along on the north-south as well as the east-west roads. I originally worked with the applicant with regard to the fencing location, and we added gaps in that fencing to have some breaks and then allow for additional trees in there. The final plan did not show any trees in those areas. I think that issue, that lack of tree, also has an issue with the plan failing to meet the 30% parking lot shading requirement. So I think this would be, again, twofold in terms of adding those trees in an appropriate manner, as well as hopefully bringing it in compliance with our 30% shading requirement. We did ask for an additional flowering crab up in this location. Along the interurban, we requested that they would have about a 40-foot on-center spacing. Based on that, there's a gap in there that shows there's room for an additional tree. We have a requirement that all single-stem trees shall be 2.5 in caliper. There's a flowering crab listed as multi-stem when it's truly a single stem, so that tree should meet the requirement of the 2.5 caliper. In addition, when Mike, as well as our landscape consultant, was out there, a number of the trees that are installed out there do not meet the minimum requirements. So we want to just put as a condition that all the trees that are installed already have to comply with our minimum requirements, which is a 2.5 for what's shown on the plan. For the parking lot is trees, and 3-inch for the main roadway plan, roadway trees. With regard to the bike racks, the applicant did provide, I don't know if I have detail in here. The applicant did provide a plan that shows bike racks up front of the St. Paul building along the, against the public market. I don't think I have it in here. I'm gonna have to go back to their plan. Go to this plan right here. So this plan shows, it's hard to see on here, but there shows basically a bike rack in this location. There's also a bike rack shown at each of the public market and the St. Paul on their individual plans. They also show numerous benches in this location as well as in this location here. So in terms of quantity, in the front of the building, staff was supportive. We did add a recommendation that there should be a bike rack adjacent to the interurban connection, a bench located somewhere in that clubhouse area, a bench adjacent to that trail that was talked about earlier along Buntrack Avenue, and that there should be trash receptacles adjacent to each of the commercial buildings. We also placed the requirement that the TC Town Center bench, bike rack, and trash receptacle is used. They're asking for a separate bench that does not meet our Town Center requirements. I do have some pictures of that as well as I can show you. So this picture right here, I'm just gonna flip, I'm assuming, but that shows you the bench as well as the trash receptacle. These are spaced sporadically along Cedarburg Road. And then I have a picture of the bike rack, I believe, as well. It's right here. So we're just asking for the spaces in there to match our requirements for those types of features. I guess I know the applicant had some issues with some of these requirements, so I guess I'll let them speak first before we address any of these issues regarding the landscaping plan and the bike racks and benches.
So first of all, just a couple things from the code, which I printed out again, just to be sure I wasn't missing something. This is the version that I printed out today. 30% of the parking area has to be shaded during the summer growth within 10 years of planting. That's the requirement that
Correct.
they're saying we don't need.
Yes.
And the caliper requirement is 2 inches, so I'm not sure where the 2.5 or 3 comes from.
2.5 is on your plan, and the street tree requirement in the codes is 3 inches.
Public street trees, which again, we're not on public streets.
Bunch Rock is a public street.
Okay, we gotta get out of here before 9 o'clock so we can all go to St. Paul and get something to eat. Just to give you some background, I mean, I lived through Town Center 1 with the windows and the landscaping, so I really tried to be proactive on our landscaping plan. We submitted it 3 years ago. We've been through 10 revisions of the plan based on staff comments. We feel like we've gone above and beyond by bringing in landscape architects. We redid the commercial portion, so we really felt like we wanted to go above and beyond on the landscape portion of this. My mistake here, when we came back, we submitted our original landscape plan. It didn't get here in time. When we came back to do our commercial approval, I was under the understanding that we were getting an approval for the commercial and the residential. And we moved forward with that. It was not made clear to us until recently that we actually did not have the approval. Now, we can go back and forth on this, but I'm just giving you my version of what happened here. Plant material was ordered. We met with city staff. We went through this with them. We tried to be accommodating the street trees. So just to go be factual on the list, the street trees were shifted slightly on Bunt Rock because there is fiber optic in the right of way up there. But those I wish we'd had a picture of those, but we don't. But those street trees are significant and do line Bunt Rock. The Japanese lilac trees, it sounds like we could prune those and get them to what's needed. The trees to be added in the gaps in the fencing, this has kind of been a contentious point between staff and myself primarily. And if you go down, Jack, to the picture of the fences.
Your picture?
Yes. And I believe the architect would agree, our property management company agrees. We do not like the look of these fences. We do not feel the functionality of these fences is appropriate. It's going to be difficult to plow snow. The cost to put in these piers and fences is significant. It's close to $50,000 for something that we don't see a purpose. If any of the architects want to add their
Well, I would
2
just
cents on
address,
this.
these are just pictures, these are of the site, or this is not what's being proposed. These were examples that I shared with them of applications throughout the city. I guess to go back to the requirement, the reason the fencing was required is the same reason it was required for the Foxtown development, which I have a picture of, is that we required to have buildings up front towards the street. And since there were parking lots adjacent to those private roads that run through the development, we wanted some visual break between the parking lot and the sidewalk, and that's where the idea of the fencing came in. This is actually, all right, I'm gonna rotate this one. I don't know why it's here. So this is actually, and this is what we worked on with the Foxtown. This is along Buntrack Avenue. This shows, and it's pretty similar to what we're looking for here. So what we did here, we worked with their landscaper, and so we have basically the pillars on the corners with the black fencing, and then we had gaps in there because, you know, we felt that if it was a straight fence across the whole way, that would look a little bit too uninviting, but it does create, again, some break between the sidewalk and the parking area. And they actually have a little bit more difficult task because they have lighting on this strip, and so they ended up working with Mike, and they ended up installing street trees on each side of that light pole and in the breaks of the fencing. So I think that really turned out to be a nice application, and we've been asking for it at this location since the beginning. There were some comments about, they were concerned about it growing in terms of that area. This is the area that, do this every time, I guess. So this is the area in question that's out there right now. And as you can see, the gap between the curb and the sidewalk is actually wider than the gap between the curb and the sidewalk with regard to where the street trees are. So this is the location that we're looking to add the fencing as well as the trees. And that those trees will actually help provide that 30% shading requirement, which is lacking, as well as provide a rhythm. So the trees, the gaps in the fencing would actually be between these trees, basically spaced evenly. And it would provide a nice alternative, basically, of trees as you go down that road. So we've been adamant about having that application put forward. They are currently showing the fencing on their plan, and they are showing the gaps. They're just not showing the trees, and so we're recommending that those trees get added to the plan.
Jack, is your recommendation to replace, like take down all the trees that have already been planted?
It's our recommendation to replace the ones that are either non-compliant to size or with regard to the multi-stem Japanese tree lilacs, yes.
How many is that?
We were not able to go, we didn't get our final landscaping plan for the packet until Wednesday afternoon. I had Mike and Terry just go out and do a quick look. We did not have time to do a full inventory of what was planted.
Will they die if we make them remove them? Are they gonna be destructed? What happens to the trees?
The trees can be planted somewhere else on site. I mean, there is an alternative there. We don't approve of the fact that they're multi-stem in the location that they are. In reference to some of the other trees, there's some ginkgos on site that are undersized. Now, there are ginkgos available that would have met the size criteria. The ginkgos that were planted were about 1 3/4 inches, and the ginkgos, could meet that 2.5 inch. They would have been able to find those. So I'm not necessarily suggesting that they come out. I just think that they should either make up that size that they're deficient on somewhere else, or So I think there's alternatives to this, versus just having them take all these trees out. My gut would say that I'd rather see them make up the size deficiencies somewhere else and be allowed to leave those trees in their smaller capacity in those locations. Given that they are ginkgos, they're kind of a specialty type of tree, and I'd rather see the ginkgos there than not.
I thought we were actually at our portion of the presentation, so, and I apologize, I know it's at 8 o'clock. We appreciate your patience, but when you're talking about the size differential, I think what I'm hearing you say is it's different than what you see on the approved plan, but it's not different than what's allowed by code.
The 1 3/4 inch ginkgos that are there are undersized. The 2.5 inch, most of the trees on site actually were compliant as far as the 2.5 inch size requirements. The ginkgos and a couple of the crabapple species are the only ones that I found that were undersized. And I mean, that could be a landscaper issue. It may have been something that you weren't aware of, but when I measured them out, that's what they measured to. So I mean, and it was the ginkgos in particular and the crabapples.
Can I just say, we met with Kim and Jack and the landscaper on site, and the landscaper at that time said that inventory was low and that there was going to be some problem making that 2.5 to 3 inch size requirement minimum, and Jack and Kim both agreed that that there would be some leniency with inventory that's available.
Correct, but Mike's saying there was inventory for the ginkgos to meet that requirement.
Mike wasn't there.
I don't know that. I mean, I think our landscaper was aware that he had to meet the minimum and was getting what he could as far as large as he could. I don't think he intentionally went small.
Well, typically when we have an issue with sizing, it's after the plan's approved, and then somebody will ask us if we could substitute smaller species, and then at that point we would work with Mike and say, okay, we'll let you put smaller species in, but then we're going to probably want a few more trees in there. So this is a little bit unusual because they're already in, and we're having a kind of a conversation after the fact.
I would like to allow the applicant to go through their list before we get in the discussion, and actually I ask that staff also unless they ask a question, allow them to go through their issues. Please.
So I guess our answers are in the packet, but number one, we addressed, we had to shift the trees due to fiber optic in the row. It sounds like from what Mike said that we do have the wrong, he prefers single stem versus multi-stem, but it sounded like we could trim them. It would be on our onus to do that, to make them more amenable to what city is looking for. That would be preferable to removing them. I would request that we not be required to put the fencing in, for the reason that it is not a public street. It's not facing the street, it's actually facing an internal parking lot. An additional reason for that is that we have the potential to add an additional building on this site, and there is that possibility down the road. So we'd prefer not to add fences. There is significant cost, and we could use that savings to do the spandrel glass, which is going to cost $12,000 to $15,000. An additional tree, number 4, an additional tree cannot be added on the row because of the property line and the spacing. We'd be happy to do it if we can, but I was told by the landscaper and my project manager that was not possible. Number 5 and 6, we're dealing with the size of the trees. I think we've already covered that. Number 7 is a 30% coverage. Again, that is something in the code that has to be done over a 10-year period, not immediately. Number 8, trees installed without approval. Obviously, we discussed this. Number 9, a bike rack at the interurban trail. We prefer not to put a bike rack at the interurban trail. We want to encourage people to come into the site. We do have bike racks adjacent to each one of our commercial buildings. This is a lead requirement, leadership in energy efficiency and design. These bike racks have to be covered so they're sheltered from the rain. I think if you've been at Hollander, you've seen their beautiful bike racks. So we believe we're meeting that requirement, and we would request that we not have to put a bike rack, an additional bike rack at the trail. Number 10 and 11. The additional benches. We're trying to, and I might let Jenny talk about the rest of these if we could go to the picture of the benches and the design element, but we really do not want to put a bench on the residential side. We feel that that's private. There's private yards there. People are paying a significant amount of money for our townhouses, almost $5,000 a month. They don't want a public bench outside of their window. We're more than happy to have the additional benches on the commercial side. We actually want to do custom benches, custom tables, and some custom chairs that really fit the aesthetic and the feel of our project. And maybe Jenny could talk about that. If Jack could put up the pictures of the benches that we're suggesting, that would be appreciated.
So if you go down one more slide, Jack. So on the right, it shows the Mequon Town Center bench and garbage cans that are suggested. On the left is what we're proposing. I have a carpenter who is making custom furniture for our public spaces out in front of the market. And we're also going to be doing recycling and composting and waste garbage cans. So we're having those custom made to match the furniture that is being custom made. And the bench that is proposed, I think we have 10 benches. Jack, if you go up one slide, please. We're proposing 16 benches total, 10 between the market and the wellness building, 4 benches at St. Paul, and 2 at the pond. So we have a significant amount of benches that we would be purchasing. And these benches, we feel, fit with the aesthetic of the development and the architecture. And probably, in my opinion, look better than the town center ones. If you want to go back to the other slide, where it shows the 2 next to each other so they can see that. It just is a more cohesive look with the whole project.
Does that cover your comments?
We got it, thank you.
Now, people who wanted to speak. Anybody?
Where do you start?
That's a good question. Mr. Chor.
With regards to the trees supposedly not meeting the caliper size, I think it'd be a bad idea to force them to tear them all out. You said that they can supplement elsewhere. Is there a quantity, a location,
I'd have to do a full site assessment to figure out how many trees it actually is that were undersized. But like I said, I referenced the fact that I think it's 2 species of crabapples in particular, and then the ginkgos. But I'd like to just do a site assessment and be able to add up the cal branches that they're deficient in.
So in some respects, we can't come to.
How about if we do this, there are 13 points on staff's memo. Let's go through them one by one. Other than that, we're gonna go all over the place here.
Just a question for
Yes, questions are fine.
Mike, I'm on the tree board with Mike, and if there's anybody that I trust that's not only fair, objective, reasonable, and knows what he's doing, it's Mike. So if he makes a recommendation, whether you agree with it or you don't, or you could do something different that might get approved tonight, just listen to him, because he's that good. I sit in the meetings and I know a significant amount, but Mike blows me away. I mean, he knows a lot. So, Mike, I guess my question for you is the caliper difference in the trees. How many years growth is that?
That's probably about 1.5 to 2 years nursery growth to caliper out to what the trees that would have spec'd out at 2.5.
And
The ginkgos would be a little bit longer just because of the species of the tree. So I mean, you're looking at probably a 3.5 year growth rate on the ginkgo.
Okay. Did you verify that for sure that we can get the larger caliper? Those are readily available,
Yeah,
like
I talked
Johnson's or otherwise?
To Johnson's, and they did
Okay.
have some ginkgos available. Actually, Wayside had some of them available as well that met the 2.5-inch requirement.
Okay.
Okay, all right, we're gonna go through the 13 points, hopefully quickly. The first comment was street trees shall be installed along Pontrac Avenue adjacent to the sidewalk.
I would move in support of the applicant due to the fiber optic.
Do we know where the fiber optic is located?
No, we never were. We had a meeting on April 8th where we talked about street trees, and we were asked to provide them with some species, and that was the last I've heard about it. So I don't have no clue where the fiber optic is in relation to the sidewalk.
I actually walked it with Kim, and she actually had concern with the pitch of the land, that it wasn't possible to actually plant, and we did plant more trees than we had considered possible when Kim and I walked the site. And at that time, the fiber optic was, I think, sprayed out by the landscaper.
Yeah, I didn't. Kim's conversation with me was the fact that she still felt the trees could fit there, and if they had to put in some sort of outcropping or something to make that level, there was still room to do it. That's the only conversation I had with her about that issue.
The trees are already there, though. So,
It looks nice.
planted.
Drive
What
by.
are we saying?
We should have taken a
Yeah,
picture.
Well, the plan hasn't been approved.
But there are street trees along Pontrac, right?
There's
I'm trying to understand your comment.
there's a couple of them there. They're not spaced in accordance with our code, and there's some that are a lot lower down on the bottom of the hill that we would not consider a street tree at that point. That's just landscaping of the townhouses. Typically the street trees are going to be up near the sidewalk and adjacent to, and there's not a 30 to 40 foot spacing pattern on the plan. It's hard to see on this plan, but you have basically there's a tree like in this location here, and then there's a large gap, and then there's another large gap. There's not continual amount of street trees along the sidewalk.
Do they have the proper quantity for
No.
both?
Do we know how short they are?
No, again, we got the plan on Wednesday. We had a quick turnaround time to get the packet going. My guess is probably 2 to 3 trees.
We didn't alter the plan from when it was submitted, this portion, and we really did the best we could given the constraints of the site. And there's also entries, there's 3 entries along Bontrac with stairs, so that's part of the reason why there's some spacing.
So I got a motion to approve per the applicant.
Is there a second? Hearing none. We have a different motion. I'd move to require street trees along Buntrock, but to to the extent that the fiber optics make it, that prohibit them, that they'll demonstrate that to staff. And they're not gonna be required to move the fiber optics. But, you know, to the extent that it's feasible to comply with the code, they should be required to comply with the code.
Do they have to come back, or would staff have?
So the staff can approve that.
Second.
We have a motion and a second, any discussion?
Yes. How are you proposing that they prove that the fiber optic that's under the ground gets marked? You wanted them to do a survey to do it, or?
Well, you can just call Digger's Hotline, do a
Any
locate.
other underground, stuff when you're installing,
We pay for that anyway, so
it's free.
we pay for it.
It was done. We had Digger's Hotline out there. I mean, we're not lying. We
Fine,
had
no,
Digger's
we don't know
Hotline
where
out
it
there.
is.
We had to know where it was.
Well, we have a motion and a second,
And we've already had walk through the site with Kim. It's,
and then if Kim agrees to it, we're fine.
again,
We have a motion and a second. Any other discussion from the commissioners? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
The next, the Japanese tree lilacs in the parking lot should be single stem. I do have a question for Mike. Can you trim
I don't think you're
bushes
gonna be able
to
to.
be single stem?
Yeah, I don't think you'll be able to trim that. The way these Japanese tree lilacs are, just to kind of paint the picture, is they're branched about right now 12 to 18 inches off the ground. That's going to continue to be where they want to be branched. I mean, if you would prune them up to a single stem, you're never going to achieve that height that you're looking for. You know, a height that you're looking for off of a Japanese tree lilac single stem to start would probably be, you know, where the first branching would start at about 4.5 to 5.5 feet. And then you're going to be able to trim that up and achieve that single stem look that you're looking for. I think in this particular situation, I think you're branched to it, you know, way too low, and that tree's going to want to continue to kind of grow outward from that location.
How many Japanese tree lilacs are there in the plans?
At least 10.
Do we have any sort of motion?
I'll move that Japanese lilacs need to be replaced with single stem Japanese lilacs.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion. I find this one to be kind of harsh.
I don't know what the alternative is.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, I'll say no.
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 Okay, can we do a roll call, please?
Commissioner Baca,
Aye.
Commissioner Chorin,
Aye.
Commissioner Jim Schaefer,
Aye.
Commissioner Lemke,
Aye.
Commissioner Stoker,
Aye.
Commissioner Parrish,
Aye.
Alderman Strelchek,
No.
Mayor Worth.
No. The ayes
Vote
have it.
passes 6-2.
One additional flowering crab shall be added along the railroad right of way.
Did you?
Do we have a motion?
I think you skipped one there.
Oh, I'm sorry. Trees shall be added in the gaps between the fences adjacent to the parking lot. Motion.
Are we gonna
I got a
talk about
question.
making them put the fence in even?
Okay, well, that can be the motion. Yes.
So my question is, the applicant stated that this. Hello. Siri.
The ringer off.
So my question is, the applicant stated that the spacing of where these fences would go is where a potential new building would go. Is that correct? The option, and
The
they have the
PU
option of.
The PUD option, there was the ability to have a to be determined building, but it was located in this portion right here. I think that's going to be difficult. That would only impact one section of fencing, but it would also impact a large portion of the parking area and the layout of the parking, and possibly some, you know, movement through the parking lot. So that's the location. So it would not have any impact on the other portions of fencing.
Show me where the other portion of the fencing is again.
There's a section on this portion here, a section on this portion here, and a section on this portion here.
Well, I struggle having them put a structure in where they have approval for another structure later. So
They don't have approval.
The PUD said, I believe
They
the
have an
PUD
option
said they were
for-
allowed additional building and to be determined within, I have to look at the ordinance, within a couple of years of the final occupancy. But there's not an official approval of the building. It was a kind of a placeholder.
But it's a placeholder for a building that they have the option to come back forward for. You know, again, my statement is, so you want a fence where they can put a building in the future.
They have a parking lot where there's gonna be potential building in the future.
We have a motion of any sort here.
Yeah, parking lot, but it's
I'd like
current.
to,
Mr. Parrish?
sure, I'd like to make a motion to suspend this topic for 6 months until the project is complete, after which we could do a better assessment if a fence is needed. Because, just as a side note, I don't understand the fence. If it was along the road and trying to be consistent with what the other developers did at Foxtown, that totally makes sense. There's a fence along the road, it's consistent. But these are like internal fences, and if a need is shown, then let's do it later on. So my motion is to table this for 6 months till the project is complete.
It's 6 months project completion.
Well, I think by doing that, you're gonna, it's a double-edged sword. You have the trees or landscaping that'll have to go in, and that's gonna have to be put on hold as well then, because I don't think you wanna have landscaping put in or trees put in and then have to come back and then put a fence in later. And I guess, again, it may be private, but from the pedestrian or the vehicle coming through here, these will have names. It's gonna appear no different than any other public street, and that's the intent of that fence, is to segregate the traffic from that road and the parking lot with that fence. It's the same application that we required for Foxtown. I'm not sure there's a distinction between the two, whether it's a private or public road.
On the same road.
I totally get it on the perimeter of the property. Within, I don't get it at all. I just don't get it, and I won't.
And we oppose the fencing for what it's worth. I mean, we don't see the need for it. We think there's no space for it. We've not been in favor of that from day one. It's interior to our site. And there is a potential for another building, in one of these locations.
Jack, is the intention of the fencing to control pedestrian, to direct them to intersections where there's crosswalks?
Yeah, and I think the picture I can show you again of the Foxtown one. There's several different benefits and reasons for the fencing. You're right. Number one is to control where people can walk by directing them to, again, sidewalk. It's also to create a buffer between the cars that are going to roll up on this curbing as well as people walking down the street. It provides a safety factor, especially if you're with kids. You want to have that break between the two. And then third, it creates an edge. Again, the town center requirement is that 70% of the frontage has to be occupied by buildings. Obviously, in the case of the brewery, they couldn't meet that requirement. So in that, as a substitute that requirement, the fencing was put in to create that edge similar to what a building would be. So it's basically three different reasons why it's there.
I guess the concern I have too is that my guess is that over time with the snow plowing, that fence is going to need to be replaced, right? I mean, what's been the experience, or hasn't there been enough examples in the city to?
Well, again, I don't think with these fences it's less of an issue. I mean, there's areas where we have 6-foot stockade fences with no breaks in that plows will hit, but that's a management issue for the owner.
Mr. Genchis.
Jack, will you confirm that is along Blunt Rock, correct?
Correct.
Okay. I'm gonna express an opinion. I'm along with Commissioner Parrish. I think that the signage or the fencing and the spacing makes sense facing outward toward a public road. I have a similar issue with Commissioner Parrish with requiring that internally. I understand that they're going to be named roads within the development, but I just
to clarify, that's Industrial Drive, a continuation
well, that's
of
industrial.
it, where the fencing is being proposed. Now, Industrial Drive may be renamed. Am I correct that is the extension of Industrial
It's the
Drive?
extension of Industrial Drive. It is not a public dedicated street, but from a visual perspective, again, in fact, at one point in the future, my guess is there'll be a signalized intersection there. So it's going to appear to the pedestrian or the driver of a vehicle that is still considered public as you drive in there. So I don't see a distinction between that street and what you see here, other than the fact it's right away versus not.
It's the same width, it has road, way curbs as opposed to driveway curbs. There is no visual difference and no usage difference. There's simply a difference in, which is a significant one, but a difference in title.
And posted speed.
And I think you're right, Mr. Mayor, there's a significant difference between being a publicly
there is.
dedicated street and a private street.
But we could have, and the commission could have made this to be designed as a driveway. It didn't, that wasn't the intent. Could have had driveway curbs, driveway widths. Mr. Choran.
It seems like we have two options. The fencing that's shown on the plan with the additional trees suggested by the staff, or no fencing and having to submit an entirely new landscape plan because.
Or additional trees.
Right.
Staff
Yeah,
approval.
and it's also in conjunction with the requirement for the 30% shading requirement, which would also help with that issue. And then I just want to clarify, the 30% shading requirement is a requirement at 10 years, but we don't measure it at 10 years. The landscape architect reviews the plantings today and interpolates in 10 years whether it's going to comply with that requirement, and currently it's not. So this would be, again, adding the trees in those gaps are going to help get closer to compliance with that 30% shading requirement as well.
And our preference is to have more trees as opposed to the fence.
We could add more trees, we could make up the calibers, and we'd much rather have more trees than more hardscaping on the site, if possible.
We had a motion, I don't know if there was a second. If somebody has a motion, please make it.
I'll withdraw my motion.
Does somebody have a motion?
How about a motion to eliminate the fencing, add the trees to meet the shading requirement and the deficiency caused by the existing trees that don't meet the caliper on site?
And these will be 3-inch trees, correct?
For Mike Geese.
Well, if it's along, again, it's along a street, it should be 3-inch, but if it's in the parking lot, their plan's 2.5.
Okay.
It's 2.5.
Well, some of this is, the ones that are on Industrial Drive extension, what are those? I just don't want to walk away with a disagreement about what this commission decided.
Well, they have street trees already installed on their plan. The only place that they don't have them would be along the east-west road on the north end of the parking lot. Those would be along that road. Those could be 3-inch. But my guess is that's where they're going to have concern about fitting trees in there as well, because that was brought up in their commentary as well.
Please be clear.
Sure, I can show you a picture.
Wasn't there fencing along, what is the extension of Bunt Rock?
Well, this, here, I'm going to show you, this will clarify. So this is a section coming down off of Bunch Rock coming into the site. There's a portion, this area here is required to have the fence and the trees. If you're saying that you want to have trees along here, this would be considered a street tree along this road, so these would have to be larger. But I'm assuming this is one of the areas where said there was concern over spacing because this is the smallest width out there. The other spacing areas are a lot wider than this.
In there, I think it's ridiculous to put in trees, personally. I think a fence would look a lot better. And because trees aren't gonna grow or stay.
That's why they suggested the irrigation system for that portion in the packet.
Well, the staff didn't just tear you against it.
Something needs to go there.
So do I amend it by saying where there is insufficient width to support a 3-inch caliper tree that fencing has to go in?
I would rather be more specific to which locations you'd prefer to see the fencing versus, I mean, this area, this area is along the roadway, and then the picture, this is the area. This is the area that is basically the same width, should be on both sides of the road running, south to north. So I guess, is it your determination that this is insufficient or not?
That looks wider, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a lot wider, but this was also an area, I think they didn't want to put the trees in this area as well because they said it was just insufficient for width. Staff's opinion that it's wide enough for trees, but it's also, I think, wide enough for a fence and the trees.
What's Mike's opinion?
So we're agreeing to do the trees. We would still prefer the landscape as opposed to the hardscape with the fencing. We would really prefer not to do the fencing.
Mike?
I agree with the fact that trees would be supported better in these two applications where you're seeing the wider width here. And I would be agreeable with that, without the fencing in particular. The other area, I don't think that that trees are gonna be applicable to that area. That first area that he showed coming in off of,
One truck?
next to the PD there, yep.
But if you want fencing there, you basically are gonna have fencing that runs basically along this stretch and then stops. Because if you go this way, unless you wanna include this area to be fenced, this area is wider than this area. But I don't know if you'd want a fence that just stops right here instead of wrapping it around.
So can you point to area 1 on the map with the pointer, and can you point to area 2, the second picture on there, so we all know exactly what we're talking about?
This is the first area with the real narrow section, that's right here.
Right.
The other picture I have is this section right here. The other side, though, is pretty similar in terms of width. So this is the area you're saying to put the fence, but then it's just gonna stop, and it's not gonna go anywhere, and you could make it go all the way this way so it incorporates this corner. This area is where you said it's wide enough to just add the trees. We didn't look at this area down here, but it's relatively similar to the one above.
So Jack, the area A, would trees even grow there?
Well, I would defer to Mike on that.
Yeah, I don't think that area is wide enough for any long-term, recommendation on trees. It's just, even if you were to go with a smaller scale tree, I don't think that it would ever survive the survivability of that, especially with looking at where that parking lot and where they're gonna dump snow off that end there. I think you're gonna kind of impact it from both sides, given that there's sidewalk on the north side of that location, and then you have the parking lot, directly adjacent on the south side. So I think trees wouldn't be relevant there.
What about other plant material?
You could do other, grass plant material. I mean, had anybody given any thought to any like planters or anything that could suffice instead of, in lieu of fencing in those locations where you would do planters, in between where trees would go to kind of soften that area and still provide some type of hardscape in that area? Because if you had some type of planter in between where the trees planting was going on, you'd kind of provide that blockade that you're kind of looking for, rather than fencing.
The current plan shows fencing with some plantings between them.
So our preference would be plant material there in lieu of fencing. No fencing and no additional planters or hardscape. Our preference would be plantings and street trees where appropriate and where those would be supported, and where the trees would not be supported to have additional plant material.
I'll try to be Solomon here. I would make a motion to allow trees on the east side of the industrial road extension, but that corner be as designed and suggested by staff. So that it makes no sense to have one stretch of fence and not have it wrap the corner. I think that would look bad. Or alternatively, unless they do have some sort of concept of planters. So I'd add that to my motion, that if they came up with instead of a fence, some sort of decorative planter that's acceptable to staff, that could be used in lieu of the fence on the north side, and then they could put trees on the east side.
I would, yeah. Mr. Mayor, are you also stating with the fence on the,
West side. West side.
on the, north side of that parking lot, entering off of Buntrock, that they wouldn't be required to put trees in there because staff has stated they won't grow?
I said there, it's either gonna be a fence or planter, some sort of decorative
Okay,
planters,
okay,
something more than just, a little box on the ground
okay.
that they could put along there. If they do that, they could have trees on the west side of the road,
How do,
as you wrap the corner. If
Right.
not, it's a fence that wraps the corner.
And I'd prefer to see trees on the west side of the road in with the fencing or
Well,
planters.
it would be trees in with the fencing,
Yeah,
as suggested by staff, if they don't do the decorative planters.
I think that's fair.
It gives an option, and they, either that or they go along with staff's approval. That's a motion, is there a second? Second. We have a motion and a second, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay, the next, where the heck are we? One additional flowering crab shall be added along the railroad right-of-way.
So moved.
There's a motion, is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All single-stelled trees shall be 2.5 caliper, and again, we go back to the American flowering crab, I think, is what that is listed on schedule as multi-stem. This is in parking lots, I'm assuming,
Yes,
and not along the extension to Industrial Drive.
correct.
Do we have a motion or a discussion?
So what is this one again?
Number 5.
Right.
All single stelled, are we going to make them swap out trees that are under 2.5 inches? A potential alternative that somebody suggested is, to the extent that there are trees there that are under 2.5 inches, that they make up the diameter difference by adding some trees somewhere else.
I'd make a motion that they can make up the diameter difference elsewhere on site.
Second.
And what about the American flowering crab? Is that just one tree?
Yeah, it's listed as a multi-stem when in fact it's a single stem, so.
Oh, so they're just gonna change the plan.
Well, I think they're already installed, but we
Okay,
need
so
to
we're fine with
verify.
the
Well, we need to
single stem.
verify that they meet the requirement for a single stem.
Okay.
So,
So there's a motion and a second to make up the lost diameter somewhere else, in a manner that's acceptable to staff. They don't have to come back to the planning commission. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All street trees, including, and staff means all street trees, including along Industrial Drive, shall be a minimum 3-inch caliper.
So moved.
So we're gonna leave it at it needs to be 3 inches. Motion, is there a second?
The street ones, right?
Including along the extension of Industrial Drive. And that's what's intended here. I just
Well,
wanna make sure the
industrial's a
language is
private
clear.
road.
Well, but that's, again,
You disagree on that.
it is a private road. I don't disagree with that. I'm simply, if you wanna say it doesn't need to be on industrial, then change the thing. But what's written here and intended here, I'm not making a motion. I'm reading what's in the staff report,
And I would-
making sure that it's clear.
yeah,
what
and
they're
I would
saying.
clarify, we do require 3-inch caliper on all of our private roads. In residential, we treat them no differently than a public road.
So does this imply that what's there needs to be removed?
Well, it would.
And how many?
Again, we haven't inspected any of the ones that are installed at this point, whether they meet the requirement or not.
Or do we want to do the same thing with this that we did with the 2.5 inch?
I'm comfortable with the 2.5 inch.
So is there a motion to, I'd move that again, and to the extent that they don't reach the 3-inch caliper, that they make up for the diameter with additional trees.
Second.
Acceptable to staff. We have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Plan fails to meet 30% parking lot shading requirement. I don't assume that we're going to do anything beyond what we're doing with these other.
The only question I would have is, can we just clarify that the 30% shading requirement has to be met before we add the additional trees for the ones that are substandard, just so that's clear?
I don't understand.
He wants
Would
to
it- is
add
it-
trees to get
would
to the 30%, then add additional to make up for the caliper.
Would it make it, assuming even we replace the 2.5 and the 3-inch trees as you wanted.
Well, if
to
they're
make it
adding
10%.
trees, if they're adding trees to that section where we didn't put the fence, along that whole stretch, those will help meet the requirement. I don't know if they will or not, but they'll probably make it closer. I just wanna make sure that the additional trees that we're allowing for the lack of caliper size don't get included when they calculate the 30%.
I guess why wouldn't they, if it's in an area that would give you shade in the parking lot? What difference does that make?
Well, cause they're making up for a lack of compliance with the code. I mean,
I
it's,
know, but it's gonna certainly, if those trees are determined by you and the applicant that they're gonna go in the area that would help shading the tree, I guess to me.
we don't typically allow that. I mean, that's fine, but that's not been the standard practice, but.
I guess my question is if they had done everything right, would they have made this 30%?
I don't know. Again, that depends on what they're submitting for species and, I mean.
But if the trees they had submitted had been the right size.
Oh, no, then they wouldn't have met it. They would have to add, again, that's why that area where the fencing, they're gonna have to add trees in that area. They might have to add trees on the other islands, to make that 30%. His review of the 30% requirement is based on the plan, not actually on what's out there.
What percentage are they at now?
He did not specify. He said it fails to meet it. It's something he would have to calculate again.
So we have
If
literally.
we're adding additional trees, why shouldn't those count? And keep in mind that all the commercial was not supposed to be done until December of 2020, so we should get credit for some of the extra growth also.
Well, I'd say they don't count because otherwise there's nothing negative to planting the underside. So you were gonna have to meet the 30% either way. And now you meet the 30% with the smaller caliber trees and don't really have to do any extra work because you planted the small caliber trees.
There's gonna be more caliper
I'd like
later
to see
anyway.
a little bit extra because we allowed the small ones.
Yep.
Is there a motion?
Yes?
I don't hear it. I don't know what it is. Please, someone make a motion.
I make a motion that we allow them to use the trees that they're making up for the lack in caliper. If those trees are pertinent to helping the 30% coverage in the parking lot, that be included. But under no uncertain terms, they do make the 30% coverage in the end. Whether they have to replace existing trees or not, but I would allow them to use the additional trees.
Is there a second to that?
Second?
Okay, my comment, I've always thought the 30% standard is kind of silly, but it is the standard until we change the policy. We need to, I mean, I don't believe that you simply grant a variance because it's expedient. So it's not totally on point because you're gonna hit the 30%. We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
I got a quick question,
Yes.
sorry. Again, because the commercial wasn't supposed to be done till, what, 2020?
December of 2020.
December of 2020, which your landscaping would be going in that next spring, 2021. As we do the calcs on the 30%, I just would recommend that we take that into account.
I would add that as a friendly amendment, I would add it to my amendment.
Thank you.
Jack, your eyebrows are raising.
Well, I
All it
mean,
means is, will they hit the 30% 12 years from now? I would ask that be, if that's something that Terry Higgins is able to calculate, add 2 years.
yeah, we typically do it at time of occupancy. It's
Right.
not related to anything else, but.
Okay,
So I would accept that as a friendly amendment.
we have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
I'll say no because of the last thing that's added. It still passes. Number 8, isn't that, have we taken care of that?
Yeah, basically.
Okay. Number 9, a bike rack adjacent to the interurban trail connection.
I move to remove that.
Second. Sorry, what was the motion?
The
Move the rack.
staff asked to have a bike rack adjacent to the interurban connection.
And I'm all for bike racks. If you can relocate that somewhere else without an requirement, that would be great, but again.
I'll discuss that. I think it's a good idea to have it by the trail. I see people coming down the trail, you've got your kids with you, you drop your bikes there, you walk over to the market. It keeps people from
riding their bikes through that parking lot. I think that would be a safer place to have the bike rack is over by the trail.
Oh, I'm listening.
Mayor, can I add a comment to that?
Sure.
We have bike racks at every commercial building as part of our plan. That's in there, so, the intent is for people to ride their bikes into the site and then be able to park their bikes at the building that they're using, is what the
It would be
intent is.
safer if I could leave the bike at the trail and walk over. I think that's safer than having those people riding through the parking lot.
I would also add that the concept of the town center is not to have little islands that are self-contained, but to have amenities that expand for people across properties. And this is, you know, part of what was sold when we addressed Spur 16 is that's what would be occurring. So
The
we
bike
do have
rack proposed is not on our site, it's actually on publicly owned land. It's not land we own.
The what? There is no bike rack shown. We're requiring it to be on,
On the trail, we don't.
not on the trail, on the private portion off the trail.
Where?
Well,
We're gonna have a bike rack at our clubhouse.
basically right in this
It's
area.
adjacent to the trail. We don't.
Well, if there's one at the clubhouse, then that's fine. That meets the requirement. That's the requirement. It just doesn't show, it wasn't shown on any of the plans.
We'll put one at the clubhouse.
That's what we were looking for.
Wasn't clear.
If that's approved, that sounds like a friendly agreement. Are we all in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
Okay, a bench located in the area of the clubhouse. Did you oppose that?
Well, it's a private landscape. I mean, we're gonna have benches and seating. Yeah, we
Again, it's the
prefer to
same.
not have a bench at the club, at a public bench at our clubhouse or a public bench on the, what was it, the southwest corner of the site. We really want to make a separation between the residential and the commercial. We're adding, I think it was 16 benches to the site, and the majority of them are on the commercial. Nobody wants to spend $5,000 a month on a townhouse and have a public bench out their
Well,
window.
the bench location would again be adjacent to the inner urban.
Clubhouse is private
Near
for
the
private.
clubhouse for the same reason as the bike rack, that if people are walking off that area and they wanna go and get ice cream or something, they would
Fine.
basically could sit over there. That was
Wanna
the
argue.
intent of that.
If you want the bench, we'll give you the bench.
I was just
I don't wanna
explaining the
argue about it.
rationale. The other location that was this area up in here. There's that trail that they're adding signage to. That trail basically runs down this length and goes around the pond and comes back out. We just thought that was be a place to have a bench for the residents that would walk, or if somebody else wanted to walk down that trail, they could sit on a bench at the corner there. Those are the only two locations. There's nothing near the residential units.
Yeah, that is,
We
that
take
one in the
both of
corner
those
is.
benches at the same time. Is there a motion? Somebody.
I move the benches get put in at those two locations.
We have a motion, and is there a second?
I disagree.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Trash receptacles adjacent
No.
to each commercial building. Oh, there's a no.
Yeah, there's a no because I didn't want the one at the north site.
And neither do we.
Neither do we.
The trash receptacles at each, excuse me?
We agreed to do the, well,
Okay, so
we
we don't-
wanted to do the one at the clubhouse, but we don't wanna do the one at the northwest corner of the site.
I couldn't hear you. The northwest corner of,
The northwest corner of the site.
It's right
Next to,
it's
right next to the residential
one of our most
townhomes.
valuable townhomes. It would be visible outside the window of that townhome. It's over $5,000 a month in
Can we
rent.
take that up again?
this is the trash receptacles we're talking about, right?
No.
No, she's
I
not.
was talking about the bench, the last.
I think the bench got grouped and they didn't intend on the bench getting grouped and we added one where they didn't want one.
They didn't, we voted for it. Does anybody who voted in favor want to make a motion to reconsider? Hearing none. Trash receptacles adjacent to each commercial building. All in favor?
Aye.
And here's the difference between the TC bench, bike rack, and trash receptacles, and those proposed by the applicant. Any discussion or a motion?
I'd make a motion to approve the applicant's use versus the city use. I think it goes further into recycling and composting.
I don't think the ones they proposed are very becoming. It certainly doesn't look very comfortable.
For the trash receptacles?
No, we're talking about the benches that they proposed.
Oh, the benches. I like their benches better.
Are the benches already made, I hear they're custom made, are they already?
Yeah, some are custom, go ahead, I'll let you talk about it.
What was your question?
They're being custom made. They're being custom made. We have a scheme for both the benches and the trash receptacles, so they're all in common and they're in keeping with the rest of the architectural treatments of the town center.
And custom tables as well.
Explain, Jack, if you would please, the concept and the history behind there being a town center bench, bike rack, and trash receptacle.
Well, when we created the town center, there were certain themes we wanted to carry through on all developments, and that included the light fixtures, which we're using here, as well as these other public amenities. This was also a condition we placed upon Foxtown to use the same benches, the same bike racks, just to create a uniform theme throughout the town center, so you're in the town center when you see these common amenities. And again, we support using those fixtures on this site as well.
We had heard one person speak in favor of, one person speak opposed.
I think theirs look great.
Do we have a motion?
Make a motion.
No, I don't.
Do you want a motion?
I'm gonna make a motion that they're allowed to use their proposed designs and not the town centers.
I'll second that.
Now discussion. Anybody want to, Marty?
Now that there's some architectural design coordination between the light fixtures and the benches and the waste receptacles?
We really don't believe so.
I mean,
We would have,
is that the intent?
Yeah, that was the intent when they were all created. We hired a consultant to provide us imagery for all these things to create us a common theme, and that's what the theme is, to have the same color, same style of benches to match the lights, to match the receptacles, to match the bike racks.
So with what's being proposed is that the light fixture matches the town center, but the waste receptacles and the benches don't.
So the location of our benches and our waste receptacles are not anywhere near the lights. It's
Okay.
all in the public area in front of the market and the wellness building in St. Paul. So there is a separation from the lights to our benches, tables, and trash receptacles.
I agree with Mr. Schaefer. They don't look comfortable. They don't look
I think we
inviting.
should have some unity throughout the town center. So the benches, the receptacles, and the lights.
Is it in the
Using those wooden benches doesn't do it.
you guys, we've given on a lot of points here. This is one that I'm gonna fight, so we could be here for another hour if you want, but the aesthetic is so important to us, the look of Spur 16, what we've done here, the vibe and the look and the style, those benches don't fit what we're trying to do here. And we're trying to up the cool factor of Mequon, and those benches don't do it. So I would respectfully request that you allow us to put in our custom-made designed benches and tables and chairs on this site.
And I think you told me they were less expensive.
No, they're actually more
They're
expensive.
actually more in some cases.
You ready? Mr. Trelchek?
So I would like to bring up that the picture that we did show of the town center bench, they were powder coated and they were rusting at the feet. I like the look of the benches that they're proposing better than the other ones. If we have it in our ordinance that it's required at all town center developments, as the mayor said, that's something to consider, doing on every single development in the town center. And if we've required it on every single development, maybe we change my opinion and I vote in favor of the ones that I don't think are as appealing. But just because we've required it at one site versus another, I don't know that I agree with it. I see if the benches are on street side and people are waiting to sit by the street, I can see having the town center benches at that site. I can see the light posts, and I agree fully with that, creating a continuous look. But once you get into the site, these developments need to have the ability to bring in some of their own flavor, and it's almost like, telling them what seating style to have at a beer garden. This is areas where people are going to be sitting and eating after they go to the market, and I think whatever works best for the applicant here is the best.
And I would add that, at times we really have to be practical. You're saying these are already in design and being manufactured? Okay. And I do appreciate your comment when, you're trying to provide a cool factor, right?
We need that.
And it's really.
Well, if there's any discussion about having the town center bench used by the clubhouse and by the other location, because those are a little bit more public in nature,
That's
I mean,
fine.
It's an option.
Oh, it's not with us.
Well,
We would prefer to have it
Yeah, I mean,
throughout.
they haven't submitted any, requests to put them there, so I'm assuming those aren't in design, so I
And we're
think.
gonna have
and-
our benches and we're gonna have town center benches. It'll be
But those are in an area where there's more of a public, you know, the comment about being in part of the public realm, that'll be feeling a lot more
It's actually
than.
a private
Excuse me,
clubhouse.
one person at a time.
And you'll have the
Sorry,
interurban
I'm getting
traffic.
hangry.
That's okay, be quiet.
With the interurban traffic and the traffic along the industrial extension, which will feel more like a public space, that's an appropriate, location for the town center type fixtures, benches.
I'd like to say the clubhouse is actually a private clubhouse. It's not a public clubhouse. It's for the private residents of Spur 16.
I understand that, but there's also a path that connects to the interurban that leads to the sidewalk, so my guess is there's gonna be a lot of traffic going through there that are not residents of the community, they're gonna be the public.
I've got my motion.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion up here, not from back there? Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
No. Can you call the roll, please?
Commissioner Baca,
Aye.
Commissioner Chorin,
Aye.
Commissioner Jim Schaefer,
No.
Commissioner Lemke,
Aye.
Commissioner Stoker,
No.
Commissioner Parrish,
Aye.
Alderman Strelchek,
Aye.
Mayor Worth.
Aye.
Vote passes 6-2.
Thank you.
So we have one last, we need a motion on the landscape plan as so amended. To approve it, do we have a motion?
So moved.
Second. I would like to make one amendment, just to make it clear. I would move to, that approval is subject to installation or compensation of the walking path from the Spur 16 clubhouse to the interurban trail. That was approved a while ago. There's some discussion about whether it's still required. I want to make sure that that is part of our approval of the landscape plan.
Can I just clarify? I'm not sure I understand what you're requesting. The development agreement required that the city acquire the right-of-way by a certain deadline, and then specifically said if the city had not acquired by the deadline, we had no further obligation. It's a contractual
There's
obligation.
a long argument back and forth about whether you provided the information you were supposed to provide for us to get the right-of-way from the railroad. In order to avoid a future argument, which is the purpose of this meeting tonight, I would like to add that as an amendment, that the applicant will install or compensate for the walking path from the Spur 16 clubhouse to the interurban trail.
We object to that, Mr. Mayor. We have a signed contract with the city that specifies what the terms are. You cannot unilaterally alter that contract.
No, we don't have to approve anything we do tonight then.
A contract is different than your approval rights over landscaping.
We believe that we've satisfied the terms of that you reached the terms of the contract.
I
You said
would be
you didn't wanna
happy to
talk
have
about
that conversation with you offline or here if you'd like, but I don't think that's a conversation you want to have.
I have a motion. Is there a second?
I don't understand it respectfully.
I don't know.
Well,
Peter,
the
repeat it,
applicant
please.
doesn't want to put in the path that crosses the interurban trail
Over okay.
over the railroad.
Town has to.
And that was, and yes, there is a provision in the development agreement that by which, I forgot the date, that, what was that?
September 1, I believe. it was.
September 1, by which the city was supposed to acquire the right-of-way. The city needed to get latitude and longitude and some other technical information from the developer in order to obtain that. The city sent emails asking for it, didn't receive it, and therefore was unable to obtain that right-of-way in time. And so now the applicant says they're not putting in the walking path.
Over the interurban trail.
And over the interurban and the railroad tracks to the interurban trail.
That's one of my most important things from the beginning of the whole project.
If I could, Mr. Mayor, I'm reading from the development agreement. The city shall, not later than September 1 of 2017, obtain all rights necessary to facilitate a bicycle pedestrian crossing over the existing railroad abutting the land on the east and provide developer written evidence of such rights reasonably acceptable to developer. If the city fails to provide such written evidence by September 1 of 2017, developer shall have no further obligations under this section.
I think I just said that. I agree it says that.
That's what it
The question is
says.
what happened preceding that.
And there's no item on the agenda tonight. There's been no notice of any of this item being even addressed by the city.
It's an amendment of the site plan.
There's
read
not an
this-
amendment of the site plan proposed. Nothing in our submittal addressed this issue. I don't think it's appropriate for you to even consider it tonight. It's not been properly noticed.
I think it's fine as part of the landscaping plan. I don't see why there's an issue, so.
If it turns out that it's inappropriate, our city attorney will tell us that and it won't have any.
And we'll bring an open meetings violation in front of the district attorney, and you're violating your development agreement.
I disagree with both.
Are we still open to discussion?
It's open for discussion.
Mr. Mayor, I question whether this is the appropriate time to raise this issue. And I'm new to this commission, so.
But I highly respect you.
And don't have all of the background, but it does seem to me to be awfully heavy-handed at this stage. And I'm still enough in private life that I would find that objectionable.
I don't know what these right-of-way terms are, but there has to be a crossing over the interurban trail, and if this is about who has to pay for it, or what, I think we were all on the same page up front, that there was gonna be a crossing over that trail. So fine, let's take it offline, but there better be a crossing on there. I don't get it.
I'll withdraw the motion since there's no second. I do think it's appropriate. We have a motion and a second on the ordinance, or excuse me, the landscaping plan as amended. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The only thing left is a motion to adjourn.
Would anybody like to know how the project's doing? Would you like an update?
It's 9:01.
Sure.
You don't wanna know?
9.
I'll be brief. We've opened our townhomes and we're 80% leased with average rental of over $4,000 a month. We're gonna be opening our Spur West building on June 1st, this Saturday, and we are 30% pre-leased. And we are 100% pre-leased on all of our commercial buildings.
Excellent.
So we appreciate the customer service we've received. Thank you.
Did we vote to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
Yes, we did. Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.